They've been coming across sniper fire, gunfire. You can see how intense it is.
We have to wrap it up right now.
They feel like they won't be able to outrun the war.
They thought the whole border was open. These doctors have nerves of steel.
You can't help but be struck by how interconnected our world is.
Arwa Damon, CNN.
You're watching CNN. I'm Eleni Jokos in Dubai, and we begin with a stark economic warning from JP Morgan head Jamie Dimon. The CEO of the largest US bank says it's time to prepare for an economic hurricane, and that's amid persistent global financial threats. Dimon's comments are a stark change in tone from his more sunnier forecasts, and they come amid a turbulent time for investors increasingly worried about a recession. Rahel Solomon joins me now. Rahel, I have to say, a hurricane of a time. I mean, we're talking about worst case scenario that Jamie Dimon is predicting. But this, of course, means that we're still facing a lot of risks. The question is, how believable are these forecasts right now?
A lot of risk, a lot of uncertainty, but look, Eleni, anytime you hear a CEO who is probably the most recognizable American CEO start to say, brace yourself for a hurricane, I think it's enough to raise some eyebrows and perhaps cause some concern among global investors. This is what he said, saying, brace yourself for a hurricane. But Eleni, as you know, this comes just a week and a half after last week he said that there were storm clouds dissipating. So the comments yesterday raising some eyebrows and causing some concern, not just because of the strong language he used, but because it appears to be an about face from what he said last week.
Right now, it's kind of sunny. Things are doing fine. Everyone thinks the Fed can handle this. That hurricane is right out there down the road coming our way. We just don't know if it's a minor one or Superstorm Sandy or Sandy or Andrew or something like that. And it's you better brace yourself.
So his concerns, Eleni, are, of course, inflation. He said it is distorting the economy. The actions the Fed will have to take to rein in inflation in terms of quantitative tightening, in terms of raising interest rates. And he says, look, of course, the war and its impact on oil prices, saying that he could see oil prices going up to as high as $150 to $175 a barrel. Now, all of that said, he did say that there were still some sunny spots in the midst of this forecast. He said job creation, jobs are still very strong, as we know, and said that the consumer is still spending. But again, when you hear a CEO like Jamie Dimon, certainly among the most recognizable on Wall Street, but perhaps even among American CEOs, start to talk about hurricanes and bracing yourself, it really is going to set off some alarm bells among investors and Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I'm enjoying the weather forecasts, in the middle of the economic forecasts. These analogies are always quite fun, but they're obviously pricing something in that they hadn't anticipated before. And I know that it's a very fluid situation. Look, the jobs numbers this week are going to be absolutely vital in understanding a little bit of what's to come.
Yeah, it seems like every data point is becoming increasingly more important, right, as everyone tries to game out and try to figure out the pieces of the puzzle. But yes, exactly. So the official government employment report, that's released tomorrow. The expectation among economists is closer to 340,000. That would be pretty remarkable if we see it because, Eleni, for the last 12 months, we have seen job growth of at least 400,000. Now, we did just get another employment report, the ADP private employment report, and that showed some signs of easing. That showed about $128,000 in jobs created in the private sector. That is the slowest number since the recovery. So that is a positive sign for officials at the Fed and for President Biden, who we know said in his op-ed earlier this week that he was looking for job growth to start slowing as officials try to rein in inflation. So perhaps this news is a sign that the economy could be cooling a bit. And to your point, tomorrow's employment report will be crucial too to see if this is part of a trend we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking some of that froth off the market. Thank you, Rahel Solomon. Always good to see you. And as we've just mentioned, it's the unpredictability of the oil prices that is a big focus right now. And they are now falling on reports OPEC is finally considering ramping up production to make up for Russia's shrinking outputs. There are reports oil producers will agree to increase output more than expected. This has been one of the key points. Claire Sebastian, I have to say, you know, all eyes have been on OPEC. OPEC has normally in this time said, look, there's a lot of speculation in the market. We need to understand the supply-demand dynamics, and now a clue in terms of what they're planning to do.
Yeah, Eleni, OPEC Plus, in fact, the 23 members of OPEC Plus meeting today. We're hearing from sources quoted by Reuters that the meeting has actually ended. And it seems, if you look at the reports that are coming out ahead of this, that they are potentially looking to find some way of raising output. So far, they've been doing it very slowly, gradually adding barrels back onto the market that were taken off due to the huge drop in demand. During the pandemic, they have stuck to their guns despite increasing pressure from the likes of the US to try to add more oil back to bring down these sky-high prices. But now we're hearing today a source to Reuters saying, an OPEC Plus source saying that it's highly likely that they might raise their output for July from the 432,000 barrels a day that they've been doing for the past 2 months up to 600,000. So that would be an interesting sea change for OPEC. We've also had a Wall Street Journal report ahead of this meeting that they might look to exempt Russia from the current production plan, which could pave the way for the likes of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, to try to make up the shortfall in Russian production that we've seen. Two OPEC Plus sources have told Reuters that Russia's production is down by about 1 million barrels a day over the past few months because of the crisis in Ukraine and Western sanctions. So all of this very significant, especially because we see these sky-high oil prices that, you know, they're down a little bit today, but still up close to decade highs. So the world has very much been looking to OPEC to try to do something about this.
Yeah, and Claire, look, OPEC Plus has also tried to maintain sort of some kind of sense of balance with regards to the sensitivities in terms of making sure that Russia remains in OPEC Plus. This has been sort of one of those sticking points. With regards to the potential of countries being able to increase their output, do you get a sense in terms of when we'll have that kind of announcement coming through? We know the end of May was always a big cutoff point in terms of understanding where the market dynamics fall.
Yeah, so I think in terms of OPEC, all eyes are going to fall on, as I said, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE. They are the ones that have some spare capacity out there. But I think it's a valid question at this moment is how much difference can OPEC really make? If you look at the number that's been quoted by Reuters, 600,000 barrels a day over the next month or so, that might not be such a big change for the market. If you think about the shortfall right now, if Russia is down about 1 million barrels, that is roughly the amount that the market would be looking to be added back, and OPEC isn't getting anywhere close to that. So I think a valid question is, can OPEC make much difference? But I think there's geopolitics at play here as well. One expert, Eleni, strikingly said to me just now that OPEC Plus has stayed on the sidelines during the whole conflict in Ukraine, has not condemned Russia. If they decide to exempt Russia from this production agreement, which frankly Russia would not be too happy about because they want the market to stay tight and oil prices to stay high, that might be a way, this expert said, of tacitly sort of, you know, laying down the line on this conflict, essentially criticizing it without criticizing it. So watch the geopolitics around this. It's not happening in a vacuum.
Yeah, exactly. Claire Sebastian, good to see you. Thank you so much. All right, we head to eastern Ukraine now. The regional military saying heavy fighting continues in the city of Severodonetsk. Much of the city has now been occupied by Russian forces. Meanwhile, President Zelensky says many Ukrainian children have been taken to Russia since the start of the war. Matthew Chance is live in Kyiv with the details. Matthew, good to see you. It is important to note in terms of what is happening in Severodonetsk right now. The Ukrainians are saying that a big part of the city is now in Russian hands. Give us a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, there's been very fierce fighting taking place in that northeastern corner of the country, in the Luhansk region, for control of Severodonetsk, which is the biggest city that is still not fully under Russian control in that region. And what the Ukrainians say now is that despite their efforts, there is about more than 80% of the city is in Russian hands. They've still got people sort of inside fighting on the streets, making it as hard as possible, they say, for the Russians to take over fully. There's also been a report come out earlier today that there are still large numbers of civilians trapped inside Severodonetsk, including at least 800 people, according to Ukrainian officials, hiding in Soviet-era air raid bunkers underneath the chemical factory on the outskirts of that city. The industrial zone of Severodonetsk is still apparently in Ukrainian government forces' hands. But nevertheless, it raises again the concerns about the plight of the civilian population that has been hit disproportionately hard when it comes to the fighting that's been taking place over the past 4 months now. It's actually 100 days tomorrow that this conflict began, and there's been an enormous amount of civilians who have been killed and injured because of the fighting between the two sides.
Yeah, Matthew, and it's such an important point. This sort of indiscriminate focus on civilians has been pretty chilling to hear about. Another line that's really struck me is that President Zelensky says 200,000 children have been taken to Russia since the start of the war. Do we know anything about these numbers?
Well, they seem to tally with what the Russians say. The Russians have given their own account of how many people from Ukraine, well, they would say they've been given sanctuary inside Russia to escape from the fighting there and to escape from Ukrainian forces. They put that number at 1.6 million, including well over 200,000 children. It's just that the Ukrainians characterize it very differently. They say that their citizens are being deported to Russia forcefully to sort of actively take away the people of Ukraine and destroy the country as a sort of entity. And amongst them are more than 200,000 children. And so the figure isn't so much in dispute. It's the motive for those people, the children and the adults, going to Russia from Ukrainian territory in the first place. But it is, whichever way you look at it, an incredible and tragic movement of people as a result of this conflict.
Matthew Chance, thank you so very much for that update. Right, let's turn our attention now to London, where in a shared national moment, tens of thousands of people converged on the British capital to mark Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. From the famous balcony of Buckingham Palace, Her Majesty and other members of the royal family watched a special fly-past by the Royal Air Force, Royal Navy and British Army. 70 aircraft were used for her 70 years of unwavering service and duty to the Crown. In a tradition dating back at least 260 years, members of the armed forces took part in the Queen's official birthday parade called Trooping the Colour. The Jubilee is being marked by a 4-day holiday weekend, giving supporters a chance to show their appreciation with plenty of flag waving and street parties. And Anna Stewart is down among the crowds near Buckingham Palace. You're in the thick of things, Anna. How are the celebrations going? We saw the famous balcony moment as well. How are you and people on the ground feeling today?
Well, it has been electric, the atmosphere down here. The crowds are beginning to disperse, but there were just thousands of people early this morning. Some people actually camped overnight. This is day one of, as you say, a 4-day extravaganza to celebrate the Platinum Jubilee. So this is the first Platinum Jubilee that anyone has ever experienced, because this is the first British monarch to be on the throne for 70 years. So it's a particularly special occasion, particularly I think after the pandemic, people coming together, celebrating a moment of national unity, and lots of people wanting to just show their respect for the Queen. Now, as you said, today was Trooping the Colour. This is one of the big calendar events every year for the royal family. It marks the Queen's birthday. Excuse me. But this year was particularly, of course, spectacular, given it's a Jubilee year. Pomp and ceremony, Eleni, like none other. In fact, I think it's got the most pomp and ceremony of any event other than perhaps a coronation. So we had, excuse me, lots of pollen from the tree. Hundreds of soldiers and horses down the Mall here. We also had royal procession. We had Prince William, Prince Charles, Princess Anne, all on horses in regimental uniforms. And of course we had the children and Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, in carriages as well. You mentioned the fly past, because of course we had the big salute from the balcony, both from the Queen for Trooping the Colour for the first time, so she was comfortable, but also for the fly past where she was joined with family members. I hope you've got some pictures of Prince Louis, Eleni, because as ever, there was a child on the balcony covering his ears because the fly past was pretty noisy. But it's been a great start to the 4-day event, and people have flooded in from all sorts of places. I've met people from Canada, people from South Africa, your hometown, coming especially for this event to pay their respect to the Queen.
Yeah, it sounds pretty exciting. Look, get some water. I know you've been speaking to us and to CNN all day with your coverage. Well done. I'm sure the next few days are going to be very exciting. Good to see you always, Anna Stewart.
I will go and I'll get a glass of champagne.
Actually, I think it's a good idea. I was going to say. All right, so straight ahead. New details are emerging about the initial response to the Uvalde, Texas school massacre, and one vaccine maker is working with more countries around the world as monkeypox cases continue to rise. I'll speak with the president and CEO of Bavarian Nordic next. Stay with us. Right, welcome back, and these are the stories making headlines around the world. A gunman in the U.S. city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, opened fire Wednesday in a medical building, killing 4 people. The shooter, who has not been identified, was also found dead. Police suspect he took his own life. The police captain said the scene was madness, with hundreds of people trying to get out of hundreds of rooms. Now, new details are emerging from last week's mass shooting in Texas. The mayor of Uvalde says a would-be negotiator tried frantically to reach the gunman by phone during the attack at Robb Elementary School, but he didn't answer. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. Now, in Shanghai, officials have sealed off several neighborhoods after detecting 7 new COVID cases. It comes just a day after the city loosened a strict 2-month lockdown. Officials are still requiring people to test negative before entering public spaces. But many residents have had to wait hours in line to take COVID tests. Hollywood stars Johnny Depp and Amber Heard have both been found liable for defamation in their lawsuits against each other, but the jury awarded significantly more damages to Depp, who had sued his ex-wife over domestic abuse claims she made in an op-ed without naming him. Heard countersued, saying Depp smeared her when his lawyer called her accusations a hoax. She plans to appeal Wednesday's verdict. As the world recovers from the coronavirus pandemic, outbreak of a different kind is gaining a lot of attention, and that is monkeypox. The World Health Organization says more than 550 confirmed cases have been reported in 30 countries, and as cases rise, Bavarian Nordic has emerged as a monkeypox focal point. The Danish vaccine maker is the only producer of a vaccine approved against the disease. After supplying the shot to some European countries last month, Bavarian Nordic said it has signed more contracts with various undisclosed countries. The vaccine, called Jynneos, is also approved for protection against monkeypox by US regulators. Paul Chaplin, President and CEO of Bavarian Nordic, joins me now. Paul, really good to see you. I want you to first give me a sense in terms of the risks here of monkeypox spreading around the world. And it's also really interesting, firstly, that we're seeing these level of cases, and secondly, that countries are responding by calling you to set up contracts.
Yes, good morning. So monkeypox is a serious disease. However, it's nowhere near as infectious as, for example, COVID. So I think while we have to take all measures necessary to try and contain the outbreak, the general public shouldn't be too alarmed. However, we're in a very privileged position that there are now vaccines and also therapeutics that are available, so we can actually contain and treat the current outbreak around the globe.
Okay, give me a sense of the vaccine that you produce. It's actually for smallpox, but it also protects against monkeypox. I want you to give me a sense of how much you're producing right now, which countries you're supplying to, and also the new countries that have called in for assistance.
So we've had a long-standing relationship with a number of governments where we've developed this vaccine, Jynneos, and we've been supplying the vaccine over the last 10 years for countries like the US to stockpile. So it's typically a made-to-order vaccine. However, we do have limited stocks, which we're currently trying to distribute to countries that desperately need the vaccine to contain the outbreak. But we're also gearing up production so that we can continue supply in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah. How much are you producing right now? What's your capacity?
So our total capacity is several million doses until the end of the year, but typically in a normal year, we can manufacture up to 30 million doses. So we have the capacity, I believe, to address the demand that we have available.
This isn't one of those mandated vaccines. Do you believe we're going to reach a point where this is going to be a required vaccine down the line as we see the spread? I know that you said this isn't as contagious as COVID, but there are definitely red flags in terms of the numbers that we're seeing that are emerging in various countries.
So we're certainly seeing a very unusual and the largest global outbreak of monkeypox that we've ever seen. However, I think right now the urgent need is to supply enough vaccine to protect healthcare workers, first-line responders, and close contacts. I think in that way, together with therapeutics, there's a very good chance that we can contain the outbreak and there won't be any need for mass vaccination.
You have a manufacturing facility right now in Denmark. Are you going to be relying on third-party vaccine manufacturers? Could you give me a sense of the production value chain and what you're thinking about in the future as you receive more orders?
Yes, so we have, as I said, quite a large capacity and capability in-house, but we have also historically worked with many different manufacturers around the world, and we would do that willingly if the demand increased. But as I said, right now, I believe we have the capacity that can meet the global demand.
Yeah. So can you tell me the countries that have already put through orders? Are you able to give us that information?
So unfortunately, many of the countries don't want to be disclosed. But as I said, as a CEO, my main role here is really to make sure that we're distributing the stocks that we have and the future stocks that we're manufacturing to as many countries and organizations as I can.
Right, Paul Chaplin, thank you so very much. Good to speak to you. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to a short break, and coming up, a former Russian politician is now fighting for Ukraine on the front line. He joins us live next. Stay with CNN. Back to the latest on the war in Ukraine. Police say more than 1,300 civilians have been found dead in the Kyiv region since the Russian invasion in late February. Hundreds of people are still missing across the area. CNN's Matthew Chance visited one small village near the capital where the wounds of the Russian attack are all too fresh. What he found there may be disturbing to some viewers.
In the liberated villages north of the Ukrainian capital, the streets are lined with the scars of war. And it's not just buildings destroyed. We met Sergei, a villager whose home was overrun by Russian troops, who then shot him, he says, and left him for dead.
So it went there and then it went out the back.
He shows me the gut-wrenching bullet wounds, but his emotional scars run even deeper. Sometimes I have nightmares and can't sleep at night, and I pray they won't ever come back, he tells me, through tears of pain and anger. I'll never forgive Russians for what they did, he says. And they did much worse. Just steps from Sergei's door, police forensic teams are unearthing yet another crime scene. Weeks after Russian troops were pushed from this area, locals are still finding the bodies of their neighbours. We were shown 3 makeshift graves on this street alone.
What do you think when you see this? What goes through your mind when you see these bodies being dug from these shallow graves at the side of the road?
So we see that Russian troops have already gone for more than 1 month, but we still find the evidence of their presence.
That's astonishing, isn't it? That even a month after they've gone, more than a month,
so
still finding bodies.
As it has
Ukrainian officials tell me more than 320 civilians are still missing in this region alone. But one by one, they're being found.
As a lot of people are missing, you cannot imagine the eyes of mothers whose children were lost. You cannot imagine eyes of relatives whose beloved have been captured or have been killed on the front line.
It is a awful, grim business, digging up the bodies of the thousands of people scattered across this entire country in shallow graves that have yet to be identified. This was Vitaly, just 43 years old, and the neighbours tell me he didn't present a threat to the Russians. He wasn't a soldier. In fact, he was vulnerable. He didn't have a job. He drank too much. His family had left him. But he was hungry, and he was trying to get some food from a Russian vehicle that was parked just here when they caught him and shot him dead.
Just one of the many alleged crimes, many tragedies, in a Ukrainian nightmare that's yet to end. Matthew Chance, CNN in Kachali, Ukraine.
Devastating stories. And joining us now is Russian dissident Ilya Ponomaryov. He's a former member of the Russian parliament and now fighting for Ukraine after joining the military. And he was exiled from Russia after voting against the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Ilya, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It's always appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we're almost 100 days. In fact, tomorrow is going to be 100 days. It's a full 100 days of this war. I want you to tell me about how you feel now and your resolve to continue fighting on the Ukrainian side.
Obviously, I feel a little bit better. That wasn't the first night, because in the first night it was not clear whether the daylight will come back again or not.
Yeah. Okay, we have lost Ilya. We're going to try and get him back. We're going to try and establish contact once again. We're going to go to a short break, and hopefully we'll have Ilya when we return. Stay with CNN. Right, welcome back, and we have Ilya Ponomaryov back online with us. He's a former Russian parliamentarian and fighting on the Ukrainian side. Ilya, good to have you back online, and you were telling me about how you feel right now, almost 100 days into the war.
Yes, sorry for the quality of the connection. Sometimes it breaks. But thanks for Elon Musk, who helps us with Starlinks. That helps to fix it. What we were talking about is that in the first days it was not clear how to turn out at the end, and we were very much afraid that we will not see the next daylight. We were prepared to fight and to die. Right now it's a totally different situation because the Ukrainian army won the war over Kiev, and right now the front lines are stabilized. Putin's army kicked back from Kharkiv as well. They still are trying to advance, and they do some steady but very, very slow and very painful advances in Lugansk region. They cannot achieve the same in Donbass, but at the same time, Ukrainian army advances in direction of Kherson. So it's the war situation. I think that without additional reinforcements, Ukrainian army would not be able to organize a significant counterattack. But nevertheless, still the situation is way, way, way better than it was 100 days ago.
Yeah, and that's very encouraging, because I want to talk about how the front lines have changed, and it's a different situation, as you say, in the eastern part of the country. I want to talk about Severodonetsk and what you understand in terms of the fighting that's going on in that part of the country. And also, as you say, we saw withdrawals of Russian troops, which has freed up a lot of the country, but now it seems that Putin's strategy is becoming more evident and a lot more clear.
I think that his strategy is being derived from his possibilities, at least his hopes, because I don't think that he has a clear strategy. His strategy from the very beginning was to capture all of Ukraine. I think that almost all of the Ukraine, because I thought that from the very beginning he wanted the Western Ukraine to go to Poles and Hungarians, so to justify the invasion. So he wanted rather to split Ukraine, but it failed. Now he is saying that he wants Donetsk and Lugansk regions. That's what he's speaking about right now. But I think it's very opportunistic, because if he can theoretically capture all of Lugansk region, in Donetsk region he controls less than half at the moment, and I don't see the real possibility for him to do significant advances there.
Ilya, can you give me an idea of what's happening on the front lines and just what is going on with regards to the counteroffensive? Zelensky has said that if Ukraine does not get long-range missiles or, powerful rockets, that they will lose the war in the east. What is your experience on the ground?
I do think that the biggest problem is in the air with Air Force, but that's what Americans and other countries already refused us to provide. That's why we're asking for something that is, at least realistic. And those missiles which have longer range than traditional Russian systems, that gives a certain advantage, because then they can shoot without being counterattacked. Again, only from the air, but being mobile and relatively quick, they could be relocated and kept safe. But already we see that the military objectives, they were not fulfilled. Originally, Russian army, they tried to surround Severodonetsk. And by the way, that's the area where my business is. Part of my business is we produce natural gas right next to Severodonetsk. So I know that neighborhood very well myself. So they didn't manage to surround Severodonetsk, and Ukrainian army holds the lines. It's backing up a little bit, but at the same time, the casualties on the Russian side is so much larger than on the Ukrainian side, so that Putin's army is really bleeding.
You know, you were saying that you were worried that you weren't going to see the light of day, specifically around Kyiv. And actually the stories that we're seeing, that as Russian troops withdrew, they were leaving devastation in their wake. What do you think of the stories, the war crimes that are being registered of rape, of indiscriminate killing, of entire towns being trapped without any food and water? What do you think of the Russian soldiers that are executing these orders, or if they're not orders, they're doing it on their own free will?
I actually think they're doing it on their own free will. And I think it's there is a large degree of retaliation in it. It was very much the same in Chechnya. So unfortunately, I'm not surprised about what's going on there. Just put yourself in the shoes of a guy very young, which was drafted, who is from a very remote village somewhere in the middle of Siberia, who knows nothing about nothing. He was told that he is the liberator, that he is to return Ukraine to Ukrainians and liberate it from Nazis and fascists. And when he is coming, he realizes that he was told lies, that his commanders are abusing him, that Ukrainians are shooting back on him, that the death is coming from every single corner of the cities that he is visiting. And these cities, by the way, they look so much better than what he was used back home. So he is coming really, you know, without a single understanding why he is there. And he starts to retaliate. He starts to retaliate on the weak primarily.
Are you seeing more Russians joining the Ukrainian side? Is that happening on the ground?
You know, we receive a lot of requests to do this. There are really numerous Russians who are writing me in private that they want to do it. Ukrainians are not very much fascinated with the idea, because right now the idea of having good Russians in Ukraine is extremely unpopular. And I think that Ukrainians are more or less right. You know, everybody is helping Ukraine. And there are a lot of international fighters which are coming to help Ukraine as well. So everybody can do this. There is one thing that nobody else but Russians can do, is to remove Putin. And we Russians should focus on that particular objective. And this objective has been done not in Ukraine. This objective can be made only in Moscow.
That is very true. Thank you, Ilya. Really good to see you. We appreciate you joining us today. You take care.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, against the backdrop of war, an emotional victory for Ukrainians. Their men's national football team beat Scotland 3-1 in the World Cup qualifying playoff Wednesday night. Ukraine's coach saying, quote, "This victory was not for me, not for the players, it was for our country." Ukraine is now just one win away from reaching Qatar. It's set to face off against Wales this Sunday. Call it a Meta departure from social media giant Meta. Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg is stepping down from Facebook's parent company after a 14-year tenure. Sandberg, the author of the best-selling book Lean In, is not saying why she is leaning out. She will remain on the Meta board of directors. Joining me now is Paul LaMonica. Paul, really good to see you. Is this an end of an era for Facebook and Meta, would you say? She's been such a vital part of the company's growth and ethos and philosophy, frankly.
Yeah, it definitely, Eleni, without question, is the end of an era. I mean, remember when Sheryl Sandberg came to Facebook as the COO, there was a lot of hype about the fact that this is great for the company because she's the quote-unquote adult supervision for Mark Zuckerberg, who obviously at the time when she first joined was a very young and unseasoned executive in Silicon Valley. He's clearly now, of course, a much older and more mature veteran executive of the tech world and also knows how to manage Wall Street. But I think that this is a shift that a lot of investors are going to be wondering, what does it mean for Meta, especially since it really has started this pivot away from, we're no longer called Facebook, we are Meta Platforms. They're going to change their ticker symbol pretty soon as well from FB to Meta, and they are focusing on all of these metaverse-related businesses within Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and what have you. So I think a lot of investors are wondering what the new COO, who is their chief growth officer previously, what will he now look to do as the new chief operating officer to kind of meld some of these new product initiatives and how they will be able to generate new revenue and profit streams for Facebook Meta at a time where the stock is tumbled this year because of concerns about future growth.
Yeah. All right, Paul and Monica, thank you so much. Always good to see you. Now, the spotlight is on Southeast Asian super app Grab as the region recovers from the COVID pandemic and borders reopen to travel. Grab operates across nations such as Cambodia, Singapore and Thailand, providing ride-hailing, delivery and mobility services with an emphasis on providing tools like education and insurance for its drivers and merchant partners. Now it's expanding into digital banking with ambitions in Indonesia, Singapore and Malaysia. Julia Chatterley spoke to Grab CEO Anthony Tan about the company's post-pandemic growth and recovery at Davos last week.
Southeast Asia is behind the US and Europe in terms of COVID recovery. What we've seen is we believe the worst has actually passed. We are actually optimistic. We've seen, for example, between February and April, our mobility rides has grown 32% in GMV year on year. We've also seen airport rides, the peak since the...
Because that's the tourism coming back.
Exactly,
Right.
and business travel.
Yeah.
And we've really seen that since the start of the pandemic, the peak. So overly optimistic for the next few quarters.
And this is important for those that you call driver partners because these are the sort of more lucrative fares as well when you're doing the longer journeys.
That's right.
One of the benefits of what you had as well, though, was this super app basis, which allowed very quickly for drivers in the traditional ride-hailing sense to transition to food delivery.
That's right.
And even now, I think, and you can talk about this, but being able to perhaps do one thing at one point in time when it's busy with food delivery or then go and take a Lyft passenger. So you're allowing that sort of seamless transition, which helps them. It's also more lucrative for you.
Yeah, so think about it this way, with features like cross-vertical batching. So a driver partner can pick up someone's kid, send to school, after school, pick up the food, pick up coffee, then after do the grocery run. So effectively, your personal concierge in many ways. But the beauty is that because the driver has the super app on his or her side, he or she's working with a very high throughput, very little dead time where we don't have to pay incentives for that time. And that way, growth for the business, growth for the driver's earnings. So we've seen the driver's earnings improve quarter on quarter, year on year. Utilization has improved as our incentives as a proportion of GMV come down.
Digibanks.
That's right.
Talk to me about the progress there, and then it goes to the point about whether you're a merchant with a restaurant that you're making deliveries to. How important is the access to things like welfare? And also credit.
You're totally right about credit. In fact, when we first started, which was really to solve the safety problem for rides, especially for women, but how do you make a phone, a mobile phone, a smartphone affordable for driver partners? So we started credit since day one in 10 years ago. We used to say, hey, kick that cigarette habit of yours, put $1 a day for 100 days, and you actually own a smartphone, and that becomes...
How did they feel about being told that?
Oh, I mean, they love it now, now that...
Tough in the beginning.
Exactly, now that they're earning good money on it. And then fast forward, now we are rolling out 3 DG banks, so one in Malaysia, one in Singapore, and we just invested one in Indonesia. What we see is, imagine building one DG bank stack, and what that can roll out in 3 markets. More importantly,
so use the tech of one market in other markets.
Exactly,
yeah.
and leverage that stack. And then how do we drive the cost of funds down, which is a big part of doing business, at the same time make accessible financing for our driver partners, our merchant partners, because we have all the data. We know how much they make. We know, are they good driver partners? Are they bad? Exactly.
Work from home, no problem, but do it for someone else. Elon Musk tells his Tesla staff return to the office or find a new one. Details after the break. Welcome back. Now, US stocks are open for trading, and we have a mixed open for stocks. A profit warning from Microsoft in the past hour appears to be hurting sentiment. Let's take a look at these numbers. Dow Jones is down 0.4%. NASDAQ also down, up slightly actually, and the S&P taking a 0.3%. knock. Microsoft shares are down by about 2% right now. It is warning of the effects of the stronger dollar. Now, in Europe, German and French stocks are still moving higher. UK markets are closed for the Queen Elizabeth Jubilee festivities. And then, of course, the oil markets. This is the important one. Both Brent and US crude are moving higher despite reports that OPEC will boost output to ease supply concerns. Brent crude up 0.3%. Now, they report that supply hike a bit larger than expected. So we're seeing some movement on the supply-demand scenario coming through. Okay, return to work or work someplace else. In leaked emails sent to Tesla's executive staff, Elon Musk told them to spend at least 40 hours a week in the office. He says, for the most part, quote, if you don't show up, we will assume you have resigned. Matt Egan joins me now. I read this email. I think so many of us have. It is fascinating to see the wording, sort of the undercurrents. I can't say it exactly, makes you feel like you want to get back into the office. But it's definitely gained a lot of traction on social media and, of course, Elon Musk's management style.
That's safe to say, Eleni. You know, say what you want about Elon Musk, but you can't call him subtle, at least not on this topic. He's giving his employees an ultimatum. Get back to the office or leave. Let me read you a key line from this email to staff. Elon Musk wrote, quote, anyone who wishes to do remote work must be in the office for a minimum, and I mean minimum, of 40 hours per week or depart Tesla. This is less than we ask of factory workers. Now, Elon's hardline stance here is a little awkward because it's really the polar opposite of the policy of the company that he's trying to buy right now, and that's Twitter. I mean, Twitter isn't just telling their employees that they could work from home this year or next year. They said that employees can work from home, quote, forever. Just a few months ago, Twitter's CEO put out this statement online saying, wherever you feel most productive and creative is where you will work, and that includes working from home full-time forever. And let's not forget that this is not taking place in a vacuum. I mean, there is a war for talent going on right now. We learned just yesterday that the United States has a near record number of job openings, a near record number of people have quit their jobs. Firing is historically low. So, you know, you wonder whether or not this could impact Tesla's ability to attract workers. Other auto companies, of course, are moving into electric vehicles, so it's not like people don't have elsewhere to go. And Eleni, we have seen some other business leaders, most notably Morgan Stanley CEO, come out and try to take a pretty tough stance on work from home as well. And he later had to walk it back. I don't know if Elon's going to have to do the same thing. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, we always, you know, when I see Elon Musk, you think he's kind of flexible on these things, but clearly he's not. Interesting to see this kind of language coming through, but I'm sure we'll hear from him on Twitter. Matt Egan, always good to see you. And that's it for the show. I'm Eleni Jockas in Dubai. Thanks so much for joining us. Connect the World with Becky Anderson is up next.
After 70 momentous years, Her Majesty celebrates her Platinum Jubilee, the longest-serving British monarch in history.
Kicking off 4 days of royal celebration, 7 decades in the making. And
weeks after Russian troops were pushed from this area, locals are still finding the bodies of their neighbours.
Further atrocities uncovered as Russia presses on with its offensive in Ukraine. And
there's a fear that if you spend too much time by a lockdown building, your QR code could turn red.
Capital, the threat of new COVID restrictions overshadows daily life for millions. I'm Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome to Connect the World. It is 3 p.m. in London. We'll get you the latest news out of Ukraine. But first, it is here a day of pomp and pageantry, a celebration 70 years in the making. Millions of people around the world are saying thank you to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for her 7 decades of service. And what a thank you. Buckingham Palace pulling out all the stops to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, the once-in-a-lifetime event officially kicking off a short time ago with what's known as the Trooping of the Colour, a traditional parade that celebrates the monarch's birthday. And this is what those crowds were waiting for, the Queen thrilling the throng, appearing on the palace balcony for the fly-past in her honour. The post-COVID pageantry and the cheering crowds creating an atmosphere that is being described as electric. And this is just the start of 4 days of partying across the UK and the Commonwealth. CNN's Max Foster has a fantastic vantage point from just outside Buckingham Palace, and he joins me now live. And on my way into work today down Piccadilly, just north of where you are now, the crowds were just unbelievable. The sun was out. It really felt like it was a day of celebration here. Whether you're a monarchist or a Republican, it actually felt quite special. Max, describe the feelings of celebration where you are currently.
Well, obviously there are lots of monarchists here, but they're also saying it's not just about the Queen. As you say, it is this tough period we've had in the UK, Brexit, the pandemic, even the Ukraine war and the tensions with Russia. I think that people haven't been able to do this sort of thing, haven't felt this way for a long time, and they were charging towards the palace today, just trying to have a good time really and have some positive news, and seeing the Queen smiling there, beaming from ear to ear, when we didn't really know whether she would even turn up today. She was last minute into the palace and we didn't know whether we'd see her, and then she looked really well. And then we got a real sense as well, Becky, of how she viewed the future of the British monarchy in the way that she brought everyone out. So we only saw working royals around her on the balcony, and that's a real message from her to say in this new era, the next 10 years, it's going to be about throwing yourself in, working, perhaps a reference to cost of living. This is the sort of thing that she thinks about when she sets up these palace moments, but also, frankly, quite a convenient way of meaning that Meghan, Harry and Andrew weren't on the balcony as well. We do know the Sussexes were up at Horse Guards Parade watching it unfold, but they're playing a very low-key role here, allowing the Queen, I think, to take the spotlight here, really.
Yeah, and the kids, of course, of Prince William, who we just saw there, and we're just seeing the flyover, which is what they were looking at. They looked down, of course, from Buckingham Palace on that balcony to the throng of people and then up to see this fly past. And Prince Louis had quite the reaction to this flyover. Explain.
Well, Louis, this is, I think, his first experience, anything like this, a proper royal experience. You know, he's a young boy. He had the 2 years of the pandemic where he wasn't out in crowds whatsoever. So he was really thrust onto the balcony. There was another little moment at the end where the Queen went in and Louis was just sort of looking at the crowds and Kate had to turn him around and walk him in. But even as he was walking away, he waved back at the crowd. So this is someone I don't think will have the same issues with his public profile as perhaps his uncle has done over time. But, you know, what an experience for him, and also George, who is alongside him, who will become king one day, and these moments will all be centred around him. But of course, we're not going to see another 70 years on the throne, another Platinum Jubilee. So I think that's why people were so connected to this moment. We're just not going to see it again in any of our lifetimes. Not just a tribute to the Queen, but this idea that she, you know, we're not going to have a moment like this where we've got a public figure on the global stage who's been there through most of our lives, and the moments like this really punctuate our own lives as much as hers. And I think that's how people do connect with her, even though we don't have houses that look like this.
You're absolutely right. And you're right. Well, I mean, you just sort of take it, well, yeah, of course. It takes you back. I mean, I remember the street party that I was at on her 25th anniversary, which was then the Silver Jubilee, of course, and I was just a wee nipper at that point. All good, and it was a lovely day in London, basically. That's the story. Thank you, Max. Now to Russia's war on Ukraine. Ukraine's president saying today that 20% of his country is now under Russian control. Volodymyr Zelensky describing the Donbass region, the focus of Russia's offensive, as almost entirely destroyed. Now, Ukraine's military chief in Luhansk says that Russia now controls most of the key city of Severodonetsk. This is something we've been reporting on now for a number of days. And what seems like a repeat from the siege of Mariupol, he says 800 residents are hiding in bomb shelters under the city's chemical factory, including some children. We showed you video this week of the aftermath of an attack on that plant. The military chief says everyone inside the shelters does remain safe. Ukrainian officials say some of the heaviest fighting is going on in that Donetsk region, with some areas under constant fire, including a cluster bomb attack near Slovyansk. Matthew Chance connecting us from Kyiv. And what do we know at this point?
Well, about that military situation, still a lot of ferocious fighting taking place in the streets of Severodonetsk, which is the biggest city in the Luhansk region of eastern Ukraine that is still not fully under Russian control, although the Ukrainian officials that we've spoken to say that it's more than 80% now in the hands of Russian forces. And so it looks inevitable at this point that it will eventually fall in its entirety. But there's been so much military effort put in by the Russians to secure this place for the political win it would give. There's a sense in which they may have left some areas of the country exposed, and there are counter-offensives underway in the southeast of the country to try and reclaim territory that has been conquered by Russia already. Well, earlier we travelled just north of the Ukrainian capital to a village that is part of the area that was taken back from Russian forces when they withdrew from that area north of Kiev back, a couple of months ago. But even now, as people return to their homes, they're still finding, bodies of civilians killed during that occupation. Take a look. And just, by the way, the images on this report, some of them quite disturbing.
In the liberated villages north of the Ukrainian capital, the streets are lined with the scars of war. And it's not just buildings destroyed. We met Sergei, a villager whose home was overrun by Russian troops, who then shot him, he says, and left him for dead.
So it went there and then it went out the back.
He shows me the gut-wrenching bullet wounds, but his emotional scars run even deeper. Sometimes I have nightmares and can't sleep at night, and I pray they won't ever come back, he tells me, through tears of pain and anger. I'll never forgive Russians for what they did, he says. And they did much worse. Just steps from Sergei's door, police forensic teams are unearthing yet another crime scene. Weeks after Russian troops were pushed from this area, locals are still finding the bodies of their neighbours. We were shown 3 makeshift graves on this street alone.
What do you think when you see this? What goes through your mind when you see
these bodies being dug from these shallow graves at the side of the road.
So we see that Russian troops have already gone for more than 1 month, but we still find the evidence of their presence.
That's astonishing, isn't it? That even a month after they've gone, more than a month,
so
still finding bodies.
As it has
Ukrainian officials tell me more than 320 civilians are still missing in this region alone. But one by one, they're being found.
As a lot of people are missing, you cannot imagine the eyes of mothers whose children were lost. You cannot imagine eyes of relatives whose beloved have been captured or have been killed on the front line.
It is a awful, grim business, digging up the bodies of the thousands of people scattered across this entire country in shallow graves that have yet to be identified. This was Vitaly, just 43 years old, and the neighbours tell me he didn't present a threat to the Russians. He wasn't a soldier. In fact, he was vulnerable. He didn't have a job. He drank too much. His family had left him. But he was hungry, and he was trying to get some food from a Russian vehicle that was parked just here when they caught him and shot him dead.
Just one of the many alleged crimes, many tragedies, in the Ukrainian nightmare that's yet to end.
43 years old. Well, Becky, another sort of part of that tragedy is the rest of the human impact. The fact that 12 million people, according to the Ukrainian President's office, have been displaced by the conflict. 5 million of them have fled overseas outside of Ukraine. So that's a massive loss of population as a result of this war.
And another fact, President Zelensky suggesting that 200,000 children have been deported to Russia. What more do we know about that?
Well, I mean, that's actually the figure, more or less, that the Russians confirm as well. But of course, the two countries frame it in different ways. Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, says this is a forced deportation to deprive Ukraine of its children. And what the Russians say is that, you know, along with 1.6 million others, 200 or so thousand children are part of the people who have been evacuated to Russia for their own safety. They've been given sanctuary there. And so the figure isn't in dispute, but the reason that they've left their homes is a point of difference between Russia and Ukraine.
Matthew Chance is in Kyiv. Matthew, thank you. Well, next hour, US President Joe Biden will join a meeting between his national security advisor and the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who is in Washington. They'll discuss preparations for the upcoming NATO summit in Madrid, end of June. Stoltenberg's White House visit follows President Biden's decision to send Ukraine advanced rocket systems. Stoltenberg tells CNN he does not foresee Russia retaliating, despite the Kremlin saying it adds fuel to the fire. Well, as part of the fallout from the Ukraine war, Russia is producing less oil, and prices have been much higher as a result of that. Now, OPEC nations will step in to help fill the gap somewhat. That was the focus of a meeting today among the world's top oil producers, known as OPEC+, which includes Russia, by the way. They agreed to up production by more than what was expected. Here's a look at where prices stand right now. And don't be surprised by this. Prices have actually reversed course and have gone higher after news of that increase came out, which might seem odd, but isn't if you just bear with me. Claire Sebastian has been following the oil markets for us. You know, you and I have been in business news for long enough to know that, you know, you kind of sell on the rumour, buy on the fat, buy on the rumour, sell on the fat. I mean, there's always a way of hedging on this. But what's really important here, because we've been waiting for this OPEC Plus meeting, we've been waiting to see what primarily the Saudis would do, because they lead this OPEC Plus grouping, and whether they will be prepared to be slightly more flexible, given that they've been lent on by the US administration to play ball on this. I mean, they've made a gesture today, but they haven't suspended Russia from OPEC plus. Just explain why it is that we are seeing what we are seeing on the oil markets today.
Yeah, so what they've done is sort of a careful compromise. They've kept the group together, cohesion within the group, and they've simply accelerated oil that was going to come on the market anyway. So they were going to add 432,000 barrels a day over the next 3 months. What they've done is they've taken September, split it in half, and divided it equally between July and August. Now, that is a gesture. It is more oil on the market quicker. So it's something. But if you look at the shortfall, you still have Russia undershooting, according to Reuters, by 1 million barrels a day. That's even before we factor in the EU embargo that was just agreed this week. So in terms of how the market views this isn't really much oil coming back on the market. So I think that's why we see, oil prices, coming up again. They're close to decade highs at the moment.
Which means what? I mean, this is really significant at this point. We are beginning to hear numerous warnings about where the global economy is headed at this point. For our viewers who, wherever they are watching in the world, they will be aware that mostly they are looking at quite high debt, particularly in the developing economies, inflation out of control, it has to be said, spiraling at least at this point. What does this mean in the big picture, in the big scheme of things?
So I think we can pull up some of the inflation numbers that we're seeing around the world. This is directly affecting ordinary people. It's not just, when you buy gas for your car, it's fuel that people, who produce food need to get it to their distance. It's everything in the supply chains. That's what it affects. And if you look, for example, at the EU number for inflation, 8.1%, but if you strip out food and fuel, it's at 3.8%. So you can see that it's more than half of the impact there. And this is interesting for OPEC as well, because if you think about what happened in 2008, oil prices off a cliff. That's not good for producers either. So I think they have an interest in trying to avoid a global recession as well. And that's why I think we see, this wasn't nothing today. This was at least some action.
Yeah, it's
OPEC.
interesting, isn't it? There is a big concern about just how quickly the Chinese economy may or may not come back, fire back into action. And so the oil producers will be aware of that. And they also have capacity constraints themselves as well. I mean, busting those is difficult. So look, I mean, I think, as you rightly point out, we have seen a gesture today, but I think we can leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think the question is, will they be able to keep up with the targets? Because up until now, certainly with Russia, they haven't. Are they going to continue to undershoot? Another reason why oil price is higher.
Fascinating. Thank you. Well, with the oil squeeze, one country that could potentially fill that need, of course, is Iran. But its nuclear activities continue to stand in the way of them being sort of brought in from the cold, as it were. Unreleased reports from the UN's nuclear watchdog obtained by CNN say that Iran has increased its stockpile of enriched uranium and won't explain its activities at 3 undeclared nuclear sites. Iran calls the International Atomic Energy Agency's reports unfair. All of this is setting up Iran and the IAEA for a potential fight when the nuclear watchdog meets next week. Well, next hour, you're going to get a unique perspective on Iran from Zamir Ibrahimi. She's the exiled Iranian actress who just won Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival for the film Holy Spider.
There is this special message for, a message of courage, a message of hope for not only women, but men and women all around the world.
That interview is coming up, and please stay with us for that, because she's absolutely fascinating and a brilliant actress. Happy and glorious, the UK's Platinum Jubilee celebrations step off on a joyous note. There's no doubt that millions of people around the world are saluting Britain's Queen. We'll be live in Kenya, where she first found out she was the new monarch. That's next. Plus, life under China's zero COVID policy, our Selena Wang shows us the extreme testing measures that she has to undergo on a daily basis just to go inside any public spaces. That is coming up after this. Well, she is a great grandmother who wears a lot of hats in every sense. The UK's head of state has been running Britain's second Elizabethan era for the past 7 decades. And the UK and the Commonwealth salute Her Majesty the Queen on her Platinum Jubilee. Our Max Foster takes a closer look at the longest reign in British history.
After the death of her father, King George VI, 25-year-old Elizabeth, known as Lilibet to friends, assumed the throne. Crowned at Westminster Abbey on June 2nd, 1953. This was the first time the public was able to witness this sacrosanct event. Elizabeth allowed live television cameras in to capture the ceremony, in a powerful signal that hers was a new, open and relevant monarchy.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
That was an example which I very much felt that when I grew older, that was what it was about. You dedicate your life to your country.
It was with her marriage to the Duke of Edinburgh that perhaps we first realised the personality of our Queen-to-be.
On November the 20th, 1947, Princess Elizabeth had wed her childhood sweetheart, the tall and dashing Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. The following year, their marriage bore Elizabeth's heir, Prince Charles.
Sir Winston and Lady Churchill came to receive Her Majesty and the Duke.
Her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, and during her rule, she's met every acting US president bar one, meetings she always prioritised. Stiff upper-lipped in public, there's little footage to show the sense of humour this wife, mother and grandmother is reputed to show behind closed doors. On occasion, there has been little to laugh about, however.
It has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
During the 1990s, 3 of her 4 children would divorce, Charles most famously, and then that crash.
Getting word that the French government has informed all of us that Princess Diana has died.
The royal family's restrained response collided with a British public convulsing in heartache. Elizabeth learned she's never merely a mother or grandmother, rather a queen to her people, no matter what. Over more than a decade, public faith in the royals gradually rebuilt. The Queen was visibly thrilled by the show of support for the wedding between her grandson, William, and partner Kate in 2011. The family soon welcomed several additions, including Prince George, future heir to the throne, born in 2013. In 2021, at the age of 99, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, passed away. Senior royals attended the funeral, scaled back due to coronavirus. Elizabeth was forced to stand alone as she watched his coffin lower into the royal vault at Windsor Castle. Bidding farewell to her husband of 73 years, the man she described as her strength and stay. For more than half a century, Elizabeth had led an empire before overseeing its managed decline.
The royal pair stopped first at this soon-to-be independent colony before touring their dominions in the West Indies.
Known as the Commonwealth, an association of now independent countries, 15 of which have kept the Queen as a symbolic head of state. After 70 momentous years, Her Majesty celebrates her Platinum Jubilee, the longest-serving British monarch in history. Max Foster, CNN, London.
Well, in addition to being the head of the Commonwealth, as Max just pointed out, the Queen is also a great friend to the United States, nurturing Britain's special relationship with America. US President Joe Biden and the First Lady are congratulating her, calling her Platinum Jubilee a, quote, momentous and historic occasion. Well, CNN's Larry Madobe is at a watch party in Nyeri in Kenya, where the Queen first learned that she was the new monarch, and he joins me now live. Millions of people participating in celebrations around the world. You're there in Kenya. Just explain what you are hearing and seeing. What's the atmosphere like?
Becky, this is a different kind of a watch party because the people behind me, most of them kids from this local community, a remote part of the country about 2.5 hours out of Nairobi, are wearing this virtual reality headsets that allows them to go inside Buckingham Palace, to go inside Windsor Castle, to see what it's really like. And it's especially interesting because the Queen has a special connection to this place on the foothills of Mount Kenya because she was here, like you mentioned, when she learned that her dad, King George VI, had died and she was to be the next Queen of England. And from there, she was supposed to be on a royal tour going all the way to New Zealand and Australia. That was all abandoned and she hurried back to the UK. And here it's been set up by somebody who won the Queen's Young Leaders Award. This is an award that recognizes young leaders from around the world who are doing incredible things in their community. And he tells us he wanted the people here, these young kids in this remote community, to feel like they're a part of the celebration, but two, also to embrace technology, the robotics and virtual reality and artificial intelligence that are making sure that people, regardless of what part of the world they're in, they can really be part of the global community. So that is why this place is important. But Queen Elizabeth herself, one of the things that's interesting about growing up in Kenya, my sister's, for instance, called Elizabeth after the Queen, and we came in this morning and we went to a small restaurant here in a small remote part of the country, and our server is named Elizabeth, again, after the Queen. That's how common this name is. The question might be, Becky, why was the Queen or the future Queen in a remote part of Kenya during the Mau Mau rebellion? These people were actively fighting the colonial government in Kenya at the time. But I know you spent some time in Kenya, but there's a fabulous mountain here and national park, and she knew that secret all the way back 70 years ago, and you must come and see it.
Absolutely, I know it well. Enjoy the day, and I hope the kids are enjoying the day as well. I mean, it's a bit of fun, isn't it, at the end of the day? Well, ahead on Connect the World, thank you. It's a scene that's become far too familiar in the United States. Police rushing to yet another mass shooting on Wednesday. It is a uniquely American problem, and the sheer number of these incidents already this year is simply stunning. And life under China's zero COVID strategy, our Selena Wang shows us the hoops people have to jump through in Beijing just to be in public. And this is a very personal account. Well, let's get you up to speed on some of the stories that are on our radar right now. And Sheryl Sandberg stepping down as Chief Operating Officer of Meta. That's the company, the parent company of Facebook. Sandberg has been number 2 to Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook for more than a decade and is considered one of the most influential women in the business world. She says she wants to focus on her philanthropic work. Well, Mexico has banned the sale of vaping devices and e-cigarettes. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador signed the decree Tuesday to outlaw the products due to their harmful side effects. Mexico has already banned tobacco advertising and created smoke-free zones. Well, the death toll has now risen to 120 after days of torrential rainfall and flooding. In Brazil, more than 7,000 people have lost their homes from these floods and from the mudslides that followed. Well, the World Health Organization says new COVID cases and deaths are still declining globally. You can see that steady decline here since the peak we saw in January of this year. But for those living under China's zero COVID strategy, things can change very quickly. Multiple neighborhoods in Shanghai, for example, have been sealed off just one day after the government finally eased restrictions. People had been locked inside their homes for over 2 months, 80 days in some cases. Well, most of them are now allowed to leave, but there are still strict testing measures in place, and no one knows when life will return to normal. Well, CNN's Selena Wang is in Beijing, where people are also under monitoring for COVID. You're joining me now there live. Shanghai's been loosening restrictions and now have just announced new restrictions. You still live under restrictions. Just explain what's going on here.
Well, Becky, it's not just new restrictions in Shanghai. This is the zero COVID regime across China, where if any positive COVID case is found, they and their close contacts are sent to quarantine facilities, and the entire community, in some cases, an entire city, goes into lockdown over just one case. So that is what you're seeing in Shanghai. Right as they were starting to loosen these restrictions, they found a handful of new COVID cases, so those communities had to go back into lockdown. You can imagine how difficult that must have been for those people in those communities. They just had one day of freedom, one day to taste what life could be like, and now back to lockdown. Some residents have described this as a never-ending cycle, this never-ending nightmare. And life in Shanghai and across China, it's still far from normal. You've got to get regular testing in many cities in order to enter public venues. In Shanghai, residents have already started complaining about the long wait times. Here in Beijing, I'm often waiting an hour or more to get my COVID test in order to get into public venues. And also in Shanghai, people are on edge. There was a video of residents running out of a shopping mall, panicking because they had heard the government was going to shut down the mall for disinfection. So life across China in zero COVID, it is still not normal, Becky.
This is part of my daily routine in Beijing.
All right, getting my temperature check.
Mandatory testing for the city's 20 million plus residents.
I've got to show them my passport and they have to type it in every single time.
Beijing halted almost all public activity for weeks over just a few dozen daily COVID cases.
Non-essential stores have been shut down, including schools and gyms, and all in-restaurant dining is banned indefinitely.
The capital recently reopened some venues like malls and parks with limited capacity, and visitors have to show proof of a recent COVID test. But still, the biggest crowds often appear to be parades of COVID workers, spraying disinfectant all over the streets.
So it's green, I'm good to go in. I need this green code to enter any area in Beijing. If it turns red, then I could be stuck at home or sent to quarantine. Through these smartphone apps, authorities can carefully track the movements of virtually all of China's 1.4 billion people. Grocery shelves here fully stocked. Beijing officials clearly trying to show people that no matter how long this partial lockdown lasts for, people are going to be fed.
Not like in Shanghai, where people struggled to get enough food when they were locked down.
This is a building where a positive COVID case has been found. You can see the workers in hazmat suits, the blue barrier around the building. This is to keep the people who live there locked inside, but it also serves as a warning to other residents. There's a fear that if you spend too much time by a lockdown building, your QR code could turn red.
Just one positive COVID case can get an entire building bussed to government quarantine. This is just one of the many high-risk areas in Beijing. Residents avoid even transiting through the red dots on the map.
It's lunchtime in Beijing's most popular food district. Normally people here would be gathered, crowded shoulder to shoulder, but now it is essentially a ghost town. And even here, there are signs reminding people to avoid crowds and security guards on the loudspeakers telling people to distance themselves. But after more than 2 years of these on and off restrictions, people are getting frustrated. Every part of our days are tracked and surveilled. People are concerned that this control is here to stay long after COVID is gone. And Becky, it sounds like a dystopian movie to have a colored code either give you access to society or send you to quarantine or keep you locked at home. But this is the reality of what we're dealing with in China. My daily routine every day is entirely dictated by the color of the code on my phone. If it were to go red, everything would be upended. And the way the technology works is rather opaque. So oftentimes the message is to be safe, to stay away from those high-risk areas. And across China, local governments are pouring so many resources into surveillance, into these lockdowns, into mass testing. By CNN's calculations, just 1 day of mass testing in Beijing is costing the city around $10 million. And health experts say more focus perhaps should be put on increasing vaccinations in China, especially among the elderly. And important note here that mRNA vaccines are still not available to the population here in China. So the government here is still calling zero COVID a success, a victory. So this type of new normal we're living, it's not going to go away anytime soon.
Selena, thank you. Stay safe. Another day, another mass shooting in the United States. The latest one happened Wednesday evening at a hospital in Tulsa in Oklahoma. 4 people were killed before the gunman turned his weapon on himself. Police are still trying to figure out what the gunman's motive might have been, but they say he sought out the part of the hospital that he attacked. The bloodshed in Tulsa marks the 233rd mass shooting in the United States since the start of this year. There have been 20 mass shootings since the Uvalde school shooting just 9 days ago. Well, coming up, you're watching Connect the World with me, Becky Anderson, a match that meant more, much more than just whether you were a winner or a loser on the pitch. For one brief moment, Ukraine tries to forget about war and focus on football.
Hi there, welcome to CNN World Sport. I'm Patrick Snell. A little later on, looking ahead to Game 1 of the NBA Finals, but we do start with the incredible, heartwarming exploits of Ukraine's national football team. What a performance last night by them in Glasgow against the backdrop of the ongoing and devastating situation following Russia's invasion of their homeland. And Ukraine now just one victory away from qualifying for this year's World Cup in Qatar. Emotions running very high indeed, both before and during Wednesday's World Cup playoff victory against Scotland. This was truly an epic performance from all of Ukraine's players who gave it everything on the night at Hampden Park. Their players are all taking to the field.
Obviously, of course, everyone knows the situation right now in Ukraine, and every single game for us is like a final game. But to be fair, we have dreamed like a team to be on the World Cup, so we have one more game, one more final, and we need to win it. We need to take it. Otherwise, this game is not going to mean anything.
We played for them. We played for those who fight in trenches, who fight with their last drop of blood. We also played for Ukrainians, for people back at home who suffer every day. Yes, we did a baby step towards our great aim. Still, we have a Wales game in front of us. We will do everything in Wales that people expect us to do, and we will be making Ukrainians proud to be Ukrainians. Very much like my team and myself, we are extremely proud Ukrainians.
Really powerful words, and all the more remarkable as well when you consider this is a national team that hadn't played a competitive match since November of last year. And Ukraine's president also thanking the national team for what he called 2 hours of happiness. CNN Sports' Alex Thomas watching it all unfold for us from Glasgow.
This isn't a fairy tale story, but could turn into one. Ukraine's footballers moving to within one win of what would be an almost miraculous place at Qatar 2022, considering the war taking place in their home country. This was a unique atmosphere for an international football match with so much goodwill from one set of supporters towards an opposing team. Scottish fans mixing with the couple of thousand of Ukraine supporters here in Glasgow before the game, singing and cheering together, understanding the unique set of circumstances around this game. Ukraine playing much the better football once the action got underway on the pitch, scoring either side of half-time and pretty much putting the result beyond doubt at that point. No wonder the players rushed over to their set of supporters at the final whistle. A 3-1 victory over Scotland secured, and now a World Cup playoff final against Wales in Cardiff on Sunday to come. Ukraine's coach admitting afterwards that he'd left all his emotion on the pitch, that this was a victory for the people of Ukraine to try and put a smile on their faces. They've been ordered to focus on the football, and that's what they're trying to do to the best of their ability. Still one hurdle for them to come against Wales, who, like Scotland, will battle hard to reach the World Cup in their place. The Welsh haven't been there since 1958. Ukraine trying to reach the World Cup finals for only the second time in their history as an independent nation since the breakup of the former Soviet Union. Certainly, many neutrals will continue to cheer the Ukrainians on as they continue that bid. Alex Thomas, CNN, Glasgow.
Oh, thanks to Alex there. Let's get to Paris now. 2020 French Open champion, I can tell you, Iga Świątek, within the last few minutes, has secured a 34th straight victory, and she's hoping now, well, she's got that place, hasn't she? Confirmed a place in the weekend's women's singles final at Roland Garros. Not hanging around either. The Polish player was up against the Russian opponent, Daria Kasatkina, this in the first women's semi of the day. And victory secured, 6-2, 6-1. Just underway, the second semi, the Italian player Martina Trevisan facing teenage American Coco Gauff, just 18 years of age. Coco Gauff recently graduating high school as well. Congrats to Coco. Ahead, shining the spotlight on the NBA Finals here in the US, counting down to Game 1 later tonight. CNN Sports' Andy Scholl standing by for us live as Steph Curry and the Warriors preparing to host the Celtics. Stay with us. Welcome back to CNN World Sport as we switch the focus now onto the eagerly anticipated climax to the NBA season over here in the United States, counting down to tonight's Game 1 between the Warriors and the Celtics in San Francisco. Let's cross live now to California, bring in CNN Sports' Andy Scholl. Andy, thanks for joining us today. Golden State undefeated at home this postseason. So, big question, just how tough is this going to be for Boston?
Well, it's going to be tough tonight, Pat. It's going to be rocking inside here at the Chase Center for Game 1 of the NBA Finals between the Warriors and the Celtics. And as you mentioned, the Warriors a perfect 9-0 so far in these playoffs here at home. Boston going to have to win one game in this building if they want to be NBA champions. And the Warriors, they're back in the finals for the 6th time in the past 8 years, but they didn't even make the playoffs the last 2 years as they dealt with a number of injuries. Klay Thompson, he went 941 days from when he got injured in the 2019 finals to when he returned this season. And Steph Curry says it's just been quite the journey for the team to get back to the finals.
Everything that we've all went through, with this is the ultimate goal of getting back on this stage, the chance to play for another championship. Like, you got Klay coming off of unreal rehab journey. I broke my hand. Draymond was injured with a bunch of different stuff. So all that stuff is just built into the context of what's happened since, Game 6 of 19 finals, and we're back here. So it's pretty special.
All right, Boston, meanwhile, is back in the finals for the first time since 2010. They had one of the biggest midseason turnarounds in NBA history this year. The Celtics were in 11th place in the Eastern Conference back in January, but since then, they've been one of the best teams in the entire NBA. They knocked off the Nets, then grinded out 2 straight 7-game series against the Bucks and the Heat. And their star Jason Tatum says it's a dream come true to be in the finals.
Every kid can imagine themselves being in the NBA and being in the finals. But, actually living out your dream in real time is a surreal feeling. And, sometimes you got to pinch yourself, right? I walk in, I see this backdrop, and it's like, damn, I am in the finals.
Yeah, now there's a huge contrast when it comes to NBA Finals experience between these two teams. Pat, Steph, Klay, Draymond, and the Warriors, they have 123 games of Finals experience. The Celtics, meanwhile, have 0. So we'll wait and see how much experience comes into play here in Game 1 tonight.
Make of that what you will. Great stats, Andy. Listen, Andy, mate, you've had another really busy week. You're in Las Vegas, right, in the build-up to the latest installment of The Match, where golf fans were back, and they saw some pretty star-studded names. How did that all play out?
Well, I'll tell you what, Pat, it was certainly a lot of fun. And this version of The Match, it was all about the quarterbacks. You had Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers taking on Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. And I'll tell you what, the trash talking between the two sides, it started early.
What, baby? Let's go. This guy's pretty good at golf. That's what happens when you don't go to OTAs. You just sit around and play golf all day, huh?
Little chunky. I call that a little Josh Allen-y.
Now, there were some good shots and a whole lot of really bad ones throughout the day. Charles Barkley, who was one of the commentators for the match, joked that the safest place for all those fans would have just been standing in the middle of the fairway. Mahomes and Allen, they actually had a lead with 3 holes to go, but Brady and Rodgers rallied, with Rodgers making a 15-footer to win it. Certainly a fun event, and it helped bring in more than 10 million meals for the Feeding America charity, which is great to hear. And Pat, what was also awesome to watch was superstars like Tom Brady just hitting it into the trees quite often, making us all feel better about all our golf games. Next time I hit one of the trees, I'm just going to be like, I'm just trying to be like Tom Brady.
You just stole my line. I was going to say that. Look, you got to love a bit of trash talking, right? Wouldn't be the same without trash talking, would it, Andy?
Yeah, no, it certainly made the event a lot of fun, seeing those superstars that we watch all the time on Sundays competing and having some fun with each other.
Yeah, you know what I'm going to do after this show? I'm going to head off to my local course and whack it in the trees, as they all do. Andy Scholes, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time there. Thank you so much. And that is it from me here and the fantastically dedicated team right here in Atlanta. Becky, it's back to you. Becky.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, you're watching Connect the World. We will be back after this.
Live from CNN London, this is Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
Well, this hour, history in the making. Queen Elizabeth II will become the first British monarch to celebrate 70 years on the throne. Around the world, many are celebrating with her. I'm Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome back to Connect the World. Well, a moment in history that, frankly, Britain has never seen before. And it's electric, and it's being saluted on just about every continent. Millions of people saying thank you to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and for her 7 decades of service. And there is plenty of grace around that gratitude. Buckingham Palace bringing out its royal best to celebrate an event 70 years in the making. It is the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, and it officially kicked off a little earlier with what's known as the Trooping of the Colour, a traditional parade that celebrates the monarch's birthday. And the Queen thrilling the crowds, appearing on the palace balcony for a fly-past in her honour. Post-COVID pageantry and the cheering crowds creating an atmosphere that is being described as electric, and this is just the start of 4 days of partying across the UK and in the Commonwealth. CNN's Max Foster is just up from Buckingham Palace, and he joins me now live on my way into work today, just up from where you are. There were so many people with their flags from so many different parts of the world. I have to say, it was a beautiful day in London this morning. I don't know whether I was surprised by the crowds, but the atmosphere really was fantastic. How is it where you are?
Well, thank goodness for the weather, really.
Yes.
It means the crowds can come down here in the way that have been, overnight and into the morning. All the main events really are over for the day, apart from this beacon lighting that we'll have later on this evening. That's when beacons will be lit across the Commonwealth. But it really was a day of military commemoration, really. So spectacular sort of cavalry coming down the Mall here, up to Horse Guards. You had the carriages with many members of the royal family travelling up to Horse Guards, where they met with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, now being seen as part of the royal fold again, which is extraordinary. And then they came back and they came out onto the balcony. And it's interesting to see these balcony moments because they do them every 10 years, and it's the Queen's opportunity to really show the world how she sees the face of the British monarchy. So last time round in 2012, it was the time of austerity, so she'd stripped it right down to those core members. This time it was about working members of the royal family. So that's how she defines the face of the royal family these days, which doesn't include Harry and Meghan, even though they're included in other parts of the 4-day commemorations. I will just tell you, Becky, Prince Andrew wasn't there either. He wasn't there at Horse Guards. We were wondering why. He was due to be at the service tomorrow at St Paul's Cathedral commemoration service, but we've just been told that he's got COVID. He won't be attending, so we're not going to see him throughout these commemorations, just so you're not too concerned. Also understand that he has been in touch with the Queen, but not since he tested positive for COVID, and he's been undergoing regular testing, so that shouldn't be a concern for us.
Take us back. How do we get to this point?
We get to this point and we sort of breathe in when we see the Queen up on the balcony, having served 70 years on the throne. We're not going to see another moment like this in our lifetimes, which is why so many people were quite solemn today in many ways, but also heartened by the fact that she looked so well. And in their minds, they look at their own lives and attach it to milestones in the Queen's life. And there have been so many, haven't there? After the death of her father, King George VI, 25-year-old Elizabeth, known as Lilibet to friends, assumed the throne. Crowned at Westminster Abbey on June 2nd, 1953. This was the first time the public was able to witness this sacrosanct event. Elizabeth allowed live television cameras in to capture the ceremony, in a powerful signal that hers was a new, open and relevant monarchy.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
That was an example which I very much felt that when I grew older, that was what it was about. You dedicate your life to your country.
It was with her marriage to the Duke of Edinburgh that perhaps we first realized the personality of our Queen-to-be.
On November the 20th, 1947, Princess Elizabeth had wed her childhood sweetheart, the tall and dashing Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. The following year, their marriage bore Elizabeth's heir, Prince Charles.
Sir Winston and Lady Churchill came to receive Her Majesty and the Duke
Her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, and during her rule, she's met every acting US president bar one, meetings she always prioritised. Stiff upper-lipped in public, there's little footage to show the sense of humour this wife, mother and grandmother is reputed to show behind closed doors. On occasion, there has been little to laugh about, however.
It has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
During the 1990s, 3 of her 4 children would divorce, Charles most famously, and then that crash.
Getting word that the French government has informed all of us that Princess Diana has died.
The royal family's restrained response collided with a British public convulsing in heartache. Elizabeth learned she's never merely a mother or grandmother, rather a queen to her people, no matter what. Over more than a decade, public faith in the royals gradually rebuilt. The Queen was visibly thrilled by the show of support for the wedding between her grandson, William, and partner Kate in 2011. The family soon welcomed several additions, including Prince George, future heir to the throne, born in 2013. In 2021, at the age of 99, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, passed away. Senior royals attended the funeral, scaled back due to coronavirus. Elizabeth was forced to stand alone as she watched his coffin lower into the royal vault at Windsor Castle. Bidding farewell to her husband of 73 years, the man she described as her strength and stay. For more than half a century, Elizabeth had led an empire before overseeing its managed decline.
The royal pair stopped first at this soon-to-be independent colony before touring their dominions in the West Indies.
Known as the Commonwealth, an association of now independent countries, 15 of which have kept the Queen as a symbolic head of state. After 70 momentous years, Her Majesty celebrates her Platinum Jubilee, the longest-serving British monarch in history.
Well, now one of her main duties really is to manage the transition, frankly. That's why we see Prince Charles stepping in for the Queen when she can't make events. We're going to see more and more of that. She can't go to the races tomorrow. She will try to go each day. We'll hear each day, you know, whether or not she'll make these events. And if she can't, then Prince Charles will be there, who's right alongside her on the balcony. This is all about making it less of a shock when he becomes king and she's no longer here. This is, you know, it's a brutal reality of being a monarch. It's about keeping that whole system alive, even as you come into the twilight of your own reign, Becky.
What a beautiful day in London it is on the Mall. That is, as of course it is known here. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Well, the scope of Russia's war on Ukraine coming into clearer focus today. Ukraine's president now saying 20% of his country is now under Russian control. Volodymyr Zelensky also describing the Donbass region that you will have heard us talk about now for weeks. The focus of Russia's offensive has simply devastated. In the Luhansk region of the Donbass, the key city of Severodonetsk remains mostly controlled by Russia, but not totally. It hasn't totally fallen. That word coming from the Ukrainian regional military chief, who says 800 residents, including some kids, are trapped inside bomb shelters under this chemical plant, which was attacked earlier this week. He says that everyone inside those shelters is said to be safe. Well, just minutes from now, US President Joe Biden will attend a White House meeting between his national security advisor and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. This meeting coming after Mr. Biden's decision to send advanced rocket systems to Ukraine. Matthew Chance is connecting us from Kyiv today. And Matthew, you've been assessing what is going on the ground, particularly in the east, the region of Donbass. What do we understand to be the situation?
Well, the situation in the east is pretty fluid in the sense that in the Donbass region, around that city, in and around the city of Severodonetsk, there is fierce fighting still underway, but 80% of that key city, which is the last remaining city in the Luhansk region not under Russian control, is 80% of it has now fallen under Russian control. But there are still fierce battles underway in the streets, we understand, with the Ukrainian military working as hard as they can to make it as painful as possible for the Russians and as difficult as possible for the Russians to take control of that key city. There's also a lot of civilians still trapped in that area as well. In the meantime, there are counter-offensive operations underway to the south, near the region of Kherson, in particular, with towns and villages, or villages at least, being retaken from Russia by advancing Ukrainian forces. So there's still an ebb and flow taking place. Civilians, of course, are bearing the brunt, as always, in this conflict. Earlier we travelled to the north of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, to an area that had been sort of liberated from Russian control a couple of months ago. And as people return to their villages there and return to their houses there, they're still finding bodies, even a couple of months on, still finding bodies that have to be dug up and identified by the police. Some of these images are disturbing.
In the liberated villages north of the Ukrainian capital, the streets are lined with the scars of war. And it's not just buildings destroyed. We met Sergei, a villager whose home was overrun by Russian troops, who then shot him, he says, and left him for dead.
So it went there and then it went out the back.
He shows me the gut-wrenching bullet wounds, but his emotional scars run even deeper. Sometimes I have nightmares and can't sleep at night, and I pray they won't ever come back, he tells me, through tears of pain and anger. I'll never forgive Russians for what they did, he says. And they did much worse. Just steps from Sergei's door, police forensic teams are unearthing yet another crime scene. Weeks after Russian troops were pushed from this area, locals are still finding the bodies of their neighbours. We were shown 3 makeshift graves on this street alone.
What do you think when you see this? What goes through your mind when you see these bodies being dug from these shallow graves at the side of the road?
So we see that Russian troops have already gone for more than 1 month, but we still find the evidence of their presence.
That's astonishing, isn't it? That even a month after they've gone, more than a month,
so
still finding bodies.
As it has
Ukrainian officials tell me more than 320 civilians are still missing in this region alone. But one by one, they're being found.
As a lot of people are missing, you cannot imagine the eyes of mothers whose children were lost. You cannot imagine eyes of relatives whose beloved have been captured or have been killed on the front line.
It is a awful, grim business, digging up the bodies of the thousands of people scattered across this entire country in shallow graves that have yet to be identified. This was Vitaly, just 43 years old, and the neighbours tell me he didn't present a threat to the Russians. He wasn't a soldier. In fact, he was vulnerable. He didn't have a job. He drank too much. His family had left him. But he was hungry, and he was trying to get some food from a Russian vehicle that was parked just here when they caught him and shot him dead. Just one of the many alleged crimes, many tragedies in a Ukrainian nightmare that's yet to end.
43 years old.
Well, another tragedy, of course, is the number of people who have been displaced. It's more than 12 million, according to the Ukrainian authorities. 5 million people, they say, have actually left Ukraine, really depriving this country of its most important asset, its people.
Thank you, Matthew. What the West has been trying to do is deprive Russia of its revenues to fuel and pay for this war. And that's where oil, of course, comes in. Oil prices have been skyrocketing since Russia invaded Ukraine and cut its exports. Well, effectively what we've seen is tough EU sanctions and US sanctions on Russian oil. That's been a story, hasn't it? And the world's top producers, led by Saudi Arabia now, are stepping into the breach, as it were. A short time ago, OPEC agreed to add an extra 648,000 barrels to the market every day in July and August. Now, they had a plan to add about 400,000. That was a plan that's been in the midst for months and months and months now. So what they're doing is effectively a bigger increase than had been planned. Here's a look at how oil prices are reacting to that news. And if you were just being straight about this, you'd say, well, why aren't prices going down? You know, this is extra production that should drag the price of oil down. CNN's Claire Sebastian is here to break this down for us, but nothing is simplistic here. There'll be people in the market who anticipated this and therefore they're just sort of buying back. There are also those who will say, and rightly so, that yes, there's been a gesture here, but OPEC Plus, which includes Russia as a grouping, the Saudis haven't suspended Russia. So there's a sort of, give with one and take with the other, right?
The more you look into it, Becky, the more you see how sort of cleverly and carefully they've treaded this fine line, essentially. What they've done is an acceleration. So this is all oil that was going to come onto the market anyway. They've taken the 432,000 barrel a day increase plan for September, split it in half, and divided it equally between July and August. So that's not nothing, right? That's more barrels of oil coming to the market quicker. But if you think about Russia, for example, which according to Reuters is currently off about 1 million barrels a day in terms of production because of Western sanctions, add to that another 2.2 million barrels a day that it exported to the EU last year. Most of that will now, over the next 7 months or so, be affected by the oil embargo that was agreed this week. And this is not going to move the needle really in terms of the markets. It's probably not going to have a huge impact on prices. Where it does potentially have an impact is in terms of geopolitics, right? Because Saudi Arabia, as the de facto leader of OPEC, has managed to keep Russia in the fold and has also delivered a potential sort of diplomatic win to the US here, which has been engaged in intensive diplomacy over the last few months with Saudi Arabia to try to get them to to do something like this, to bring down oil prices, high-level delegations, things like that. And the White House did not waste any time in coming out with a statement on this. They welcomed the move and they said, very significantly, we recognize the role of Saudi Arabia as the chair of OPEC Plus and its largest producer in achieving this consensus among the group members. We also recognize efforts and positive contributions of UAE, Kuwait, and Iraq. The United States, it says, will continue to use all tools at our disposal to address energy price pressures. Very pointed mention of Saudi Arabia there. We know that there is work underway to potentially arrange a meeting between President Biden and the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Fascinating times. Thank you very much indeed. Well explained. We're going to talk a lot more about this, including what OPEC's decision means for that Gulf region and much more on the Queen's Jubilee. I'll be speaking with Robert Lacey, royal family biographer, historical consultant to the Netflix series The Crown and author of the book Majesty. Right, welcome back. It's 4:20 here in the UK. The White House welcomed OPEC's decision to speed up oil production this summer. It gave a special shout out to Saudi Arabia as the group's chair and largest oil producer in achieving this consensus. And the White House also recognised the efforts and contributions by the UAE, Kuwait and Iraq. Well, I want to talk more about Saudi Arabia's role here with Amina Bakr. She's the chief OPEC correspondent for the publication Energy Intelligence, very plugged in with your sources at OPEC, OPEC Plus, of course, which is a grouping which includes Russia. So what, in the first instance, do you make of this I would describe it as gesture to increase production over the next couple of months, taking September's production, splitting it between July and August. What do you make of what they've done, and what's the significance here?
Well, the significance is, Becky, less to do with the volumes that we saw. I mean, what they did basically under the old plan, they were supposed to increase 432 over a 3-month period. So they compressed that over 2 months instead of 3 months. So for both July and August, they will be easing the cuts by 648,000 barrels for each month. Now, to me, that volume isn't very significant for the simple reason that spare capacity in the group is basically held by 2 members. It's the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Those are the 2 countries that could actually bring supply to the market. So those are the real barrels coming in. And if we look at the new quota system, that translates roughly to an additional 75,000 barrels from both those countries, assuming that the others have zero spare capacity left and they can't produce more. So that's the first part of the agreement, which is the increase in increment, which to me doesn't translate into that many barrels into the market. However, this agreement is significant because it pushed up the deadline where you had the expiry of the increments. Instead of being in September, it's now in August, meaning that in August that the group will sit down and review this entire agreement. Perhaps they will even review the baselines of all these countries that I mentioned that they can't even produce their quotas. And this sets the path for OPEC Plus to add more production into the market gradually over time.
Does it also, though, give the opportunity, should they want it, to not suspend, but drop Russia from the grouping at this stage? Because that would be significant. I mean, you know, let's just talk about the Saudis' role here. As Claire was just explaining, there's the issue with regard oil output, and then there is a geopolitical layer to this as well, isn't there? They have been, you know, heavily encouraged by the White House to help sort of balance the oil markets, organise the oil markets and prices while there is so much volatility on the price, given the sanctions on Western sanctions on Russian oil.
Sure, I saw the reports, Becky, like you've seen of the alleged suspension of Russian quotas. We didn't see that being discussed today at all. And as you can see from the quota table, Russia is still an active part of the agreement. For quotas to be suspended, traditionally what happens is that the country that's facing a state of sanctions or war, they request from OPEC to suspend their quota. Moscow made no such request. And no one from the OPEC Plus group will go to Russia and ask for them to be suspended from the group, mainly because the Gulf producers, or Saudi Arabia, really believes that long-term market management needs Russia. So they are not ready to upset Russia in any way, and by making such a request to suspend it from quotas. And as you mentioned, they've been walking a very thin line here between having an alliance with their Western partners, mainly the U.S., and as well as with Russia. So yeah, long term, I see Russia still being part of this group, and yeah, and this is something that that Gulf producers support 100%.
Interesting statement quickly out of the gate by the White House in applauding the efforts of Saudi Arabia as the leader of this group, as the key stakeholder, as it were, and also name-checking Kuwait, Iraq, and specifically the UAE. So you know, applauds and acknowledgement by the White House, who has had a tricky relationship of late with both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. I guess this begs the question ultimately, though. We have seen the price of oil rise off the back of all of this. Washington intent on trying to control the price of oil and get it lower. This is a domestic issue as much as anything else, given the price of gas at the pump. That hasn't happened. So that begs the question, what next? So just finally and briefly, what's your perception of where these markets go in the short to medium term?
Well, we saw this action being taken as well ahead of the summer period, Becky, as you understand that this is a driving season in the US, and this is where demand usually spikes. So for these producers, there was a fear of demand destruction. This is on a market level side. In terms of relationship, we've seen various officials come to both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi over several weeks, and these meetings were described as very positive, and they're trying to rebuild bridges, improve the relationship, etc. And this is perhaps a byproduct of that. And yeah, that statement was basically praising all of, I mean, the US is praising all of its allies in the region, and they wanted to make note of that. I think prices at this point might be lowered, knowing that, I mean, there is this increment of supply coming in. And again, this is what the US has been hoping for.
Yeah, and the wider picture, of course, is there's still very little sort of clarity on what happens with what is the big booming China economy, which is not booming at present. And so these oil producers will be well aware that should they pump too much and flood the market, as it were, that these prices go significantly lower. And let's be quite frank, I mean, you know, these prices are doing the Gulf producers an awful lot of favours at the moment, as high as they are. But there is, as I say, no clarity on what happens with that Chinese economy. Still off.
Sure, that's why they're being very gradual.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Amina Bakr there out of Dubai for you. Well, ahead on the show, the longest-serving monarch in Britain's history celebrates 7 decades on the throne. I'm going to speak with royal family advisor, author and historical consultant to the series The Crown, Mr. Robert Lacey. And from exile to award winner, a conversation with an actress who was kicked out of Iran and is now making films about her country's treatment of women. Please stay with us for that. up, we are following celebrations in Britain and around the world, honouring the UK's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. Thousands of fans have descended on London, at least, kicking off 4 days of festivities marking the Queen's 70th anniversary on the throne. My next guest is a renowned royal historian. In fact, he was an advisor to the Netflix series The Crown, which depicts the life of the royal family, let's say. Robert Lacey joins me now. Let me just start there, because as you have described it to me, and it was an interpretation of the family, because there are many who've said, and if you've seen The Crown, viewers, you'll know what I'm talking about here. I mean, it was a sort of relatively loose interpretation, wasn't it? Just explain.
Well, it's a loose it's a loose presentation of the facts, if you like. I would say, obviously, the interpretation is spot on. We're trying to bring out the sense of duty of the Queen. We're trying to bring out her character. We're trying to bring out, say, her conflicts with Prince Charles, the complexities of her relationships with Prince Philip. And for all of that, I'm afraid you can't go with chapter and verse, because this family, particularly this Queen that we're celebrating today, is a very discreet person. So studying the royal family is a bit like being a criminologist. You're looking for the clues.
Well, if you viewers haven't seen the Crown, you should see it. It is super and rightly an award-winning series.
Yes, all right. Go on plugging it. We're coming out this November with season 5.
Excellent.
Which will be about the climax of Diana Charles's marriage, the death of Diana, or veering towards that, and of course something that had a sort of resonance today. And this is when Prince Charles starts developing the idea of the slimmed-down monarchy and the whole question of who's on the balcony and who's not.
And so let's talk about that today, because that has been important. What did you make of the images that we saw today?
Well, I was down there, and what was wonderful was the way suddenly everybody was clapping, and we didn't get it, and we looked, and there was the Queen out there. I mean, her presence has been so well anticipated and worried about, and she looks so good. She looks solid. I mean, I'm talking from 200 yards distance, but still, she was solid there. She came out ahead of time, took people by surprise, with, interestingly, with her cousin, the Duke of Kent. Won't mean much to people who are not English. But he's a cousin who's sort of taken on the role of Prince Philip, you see. Someone she's known since childhood. And it was a poignant moment, because Prince Philip was not there. And also, of course, we're never going to have another Jubilee. So I think that's an element in the way in which people are putting a lot of themselves into what's going on.
And we saw a lineup of royals, not all of them on the balcony today. These are working royals.
Yes. And just to explain also to maybe non-British, a working royal is someone who gets paid for it. And we pay taxes for our royals, 80 million quid a year, £2 out of my pocket every year. I think that's very good value for money.
Not everybody does, of course.
Not everybody does, but I don't think £2 a year is bad to pay for the royal family, the work they do, and working royal. It's a very interesting, out of these family problems, I mean, Andrew's not there because of the charges against him, and for other reasons too. Harry and Meghan are not there because they have also had their conflicts with the family, particularly with William. And so actually, I think this new definition, you can go on, because in the old days, the whole family would be there. Uncles, cousins, aunts, I thought that was delightful. Royal nuts thought it. Not everybody thought it was. Then Prince Charles went the other way in the last Jubilee and said, oh, just the main line of the family. So that was just him, Camilla, William, and Kate. No Andrew, but no Princess Anne either. They were furious. And everybody else felt, well, that's not much fun. And I think this, well, not a compromise, I think this present situation, when you look at that balcony, you will see people who go out, support charities, are on the payroll, and are a working part of British life.
You use the word discreet, and you said, you know, being an observer, a royal observer, is akin to being a sort of criminologist to a certain extent. You've got to kind of read between the lines. What do we ultimately know about Queen Elizabeth II?
Well, we know that she's got an incredible sense of duty. She has worked very hard. She is totally consistent. She has always put work and duty before anything else. And so if we then veer into what some people might think are the negative areas, maybe her parenting has been neglected. After all, she had 2 children. She stopped having children. Interesting thing, she's got 4 children. Now, there's no other royal got that many. So people who say she's not a family lover have got that wrong. But she did actually stop having children when her father died early and she had to take over the throne. That was an example of saying duty first. And then she went off with Prince Philip on a tour around the Commonwealth. And there's the famous, rather poignant sequence of her coming back to Liverpool Street Station and little Prince Charles waiting for her. And he didn't recognise her when she got off the train, and she didn't kiss him and cuddle him. She sort of shook hands. So that's the cold and chilly side of her.
Prince Charles will become king. What's the future for the royal family?
Well, I think one clear, interesting prediction is it's going to be male. And maybe a male monarch is going to find it more difficult than this mother figure has for all these years. Prince Charles obviously doesn't command the loyalty that makes Republicans with a small r, anti-monarchists, feel now is not the time to attack. But I think while people in Britain sort of anticipate Prince Charles with a sense of duty, there's real excitement about William, Kate. They're a very magic couple. They went out recently to the Caribbean. The tour went wrong, and they responded. I mean, Prince William said, we'll listen. You know, if there are things we've got to change, we'll listen and respond to. And so that's the answer to your question, I think. They will respond and will adapt.
It's good to have you on. Fab glasses, by the way.
Thank you very much. They're my Jubilee glasses.
Excellent. Yes. Gorgeous. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Lacey in the house. Coming up, disused land in Portugal is being rewilded in an effort to restore the ecosystem. That report is coming up. It's no mystery that booming industries can damage an ecosystem. What happens when the work dries up and the companies leave? One team in Portugal is helping the land heal in an effort to draw back animals that haven't called the area home in quite some time. CNN's Isa Suarez brings us today's Call to Earth.
Here in the valley of the Coa River in northeastern Portugal stretches acres of agricultural land that have fallen into disuse. For centuries, this area was used for farming and mining, but the economic downturn in recent decades prompted many thousands of people to leave. Today, a small group of rewilders is claiming the land back.
The aim is to allow nature to recover, wildlife to come back, but also for people and nature to benefit alike. This means that the whole landscape is more connected and more abundant in wildlife.
Pedro Prata works for Rewilding Portugal, guarding the region from wildfires, animal poisoning and poachers, and securing new areas of protection.
Me and my team were constantly present in this landscape. We live in the landscape. We're all the time here.
The Coa Valley provides a migratory corridor for rare species. By rewilding these targeted areas, Prata hopes to encourage the return of some of Portugal's chief predators, such as lynxes and wolves.
Top predator acts as a guardian for the processes within the landscape.
But for the top of the food chain to flourish, it needs to be supported by the rest of the ecosystem. So the team is focusing first on the reintroduction of roe deer and wild horses.
They are the ones who manage the growth of the vegetation, but also they spread seeds and they take the nutrients back into the soil with their dung, and so they are the real engineers of the vegetation.
Progress will be slow. Predator numbers cannot increase until herbivores grow.
Footprints, that's badger, yeah.
Once the system is up and running, it is hoped that lynx will follow in the footsteps of the wolves, or indeed these badgers being tracked by the team. But predators bring risk. Local human populations need reassurance.
I think in the national context here in Portugal, rewilding is a new concept. The biggest obstacles we're facing nowadays actually is cultural. Our aim here is that people understand there is ways to coexist with the wolf.
Promoting wild herbivores prevents the likelihood of domestic animals being lost as prey. Prata and his team hope that by promoting species biodiversity in Portugal, they are ensuring the longevity for environment, wildlife and community alike.
We live in a fantastic world full of fantastic species and creatures that has the same right to be here and to exist into the future as much as we do. I think my main message is just let nature be, just let nature rewild.
Let us know what you are doing to answer the call to protect our planet. Use the hashtag #CallToEarth. We will be right back.
چاله تنه داره
بنایی و گچکاری و ساختمونسازی و چنین چیزا درست نکردم.
Actress Saia Brahimi making history last weekend when she became the first woman of Iranian cinema to win Best Actress at the prestigious Cannes Film Festival. She won for her portrayal of a journalist trying to catch a serial killer who was targeting prostitutes in Iran. Well, the win was particularly important for Brahimi because she says film is what kept her going after she was forced to leave Iran. She's being investigated there for allegedly violating Iran's strict decency laws in an incident that made headlines across the country. Well, Zamir Ibrahimi now lives in exile in Paris. I got a chance to chat with her just a short time ago, and she told me just how much it meant to her to be honoured at Cannes. Have a listen.
It's just like a dream. Of course, Cannes is a very glamorous place. Of course, we were so delighted to be there with all the best directors and actors in the world, actually. And yeah, this award, I mean, of course, there is a message in it. You know, if you watch the movie, it's all about women. It's all about a patriarchal society. It's all about misogyny. And if you know about my personal journey, I think there is this special message for, you know, a message of courage, a message of hope for not only women, but men and women all around the world, but maybe especially for women in Middle Eastern countries, and especially in Iran.
In the film, you play a journalist investigating the murders of a serial killer who is targeting women. You've said you took inspiration for this film after talking to female Iranian journalists who had faced sexual harassment in their careers. What do you hope this film leaves the viewer with? And how important do you think film, the arts, are in communities like Iran, specifically in Iran, to shed light on some of what are these deep societal issues?
Rooted into Iranian reality and society at the same time, you know, this movie is totally universal because these are the situations that every woman all around the world in different society have to face every day. And the character is the journalist, and that should mean freedom and independence. But I just realized after, you know, starting my researches, I just realized that this violence toward women was very strong even in media. And I was kind of surprised because I wouldn't expect this, especially in Iran, in a religious, actually, society. And so I think, you know, I mean, you know better than me that these things are happening in media everywhere, that woman, you know, that women journalists have to endure assaults, harassments, and violence in their daily work. So Iran is no exception, actually. And this is also why this movie is universal for me. I mean, the only hope I have is, you know, I don't know if we can change the world with a movie, but I think we can just make people just rethink about their behavior.
Iran's state-controlled cinema organization has accused Cannes of a biased and political act for honoring you and this film. They've said anyone inside the country involved with the film will face punishment. Just explain your story and what you have to say to that reaction.
You know, I think we have a problem with freedom in Iran, and I think they are not happy maybe with this movie because it's an example of freedom of expression, and we managed to make a movie about Iran out of Iran. It's going to be an example of diaspora's movie, and I think, you know, as it's all about women and you know, maybe because of me too, you know, 15 years ago, I had to run away from my country, from my home. I left my friends and family behind. All I had been doing in my career was destroy the whole, you know, the whole country had seen my private video I was facing many years of jails and, hundreds of lashes. And then I came to a country where I knew no one, where there was no one. And I had to start it all over again. So I think, as I said, there is a really, really big message in this award. They need just to show us that they are angry or they are not happy to watch this movie. And, the problem is that they didn't even watch this movie. And they are judging this movie just from a trailer. And maybe some just, humor that they heard about this movie. And so I think I don't mind. And I think the whole team don't mind. We know them. This is normal.
You fled your homeland, Iran, in 2006 after what was an unfortunate incident which resulted in you becoming the subject of an investigation by the Iranian government. And as you say in your acceptance speech, you gave quite an emotional tribute to Iran, your home. Do you have plans to return?
No, not at all. I mean, I would love. I miss my country. I miss my home. I miss my room. I miss all those streets that, I grew up in this country. And, but I mean, I don't have any hope, with this government, with this, with the situation we have right now. I never thought that I can just come back, can go back,
What is next? What are you working on at this point?
You mean my professional work? Yeah, I have another project in Australia with a very young Iranian director, female director, and it's going to be so exciting. There is Kate Blanchett as executive producer. Noura Niasari is the director, actually. And it is also about women.
Well, we wish her the best. Well, thank you for joining us wherever you are watching the world. I want to leave you with these colourful images of Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. It's from the team working with me here in London and around the world. It is a very good evening.
The world has witnessed a truly historic moment for the British monarchy. Here is what's coming up.
We're not going to see another moment like this, certainly not in our lifetimes.
Britain's longest reigning monarch celebrates 70 years on the throne. Plus,
do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
the celebrity defamation trial ends in a victory for Johnny Depp, while Amber Heard's attorney is crying foul. And
it's astonishing, isn't it, that even a month after they've gone, more than a month, still finding bodies.
CNN's Matthew Chance witnesses the crime scenes left behind by Russian forces. Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher in New York, and this is One World. Most British citizens have only known one monarch in their lifetime, that is Queen Elizabeth II. The UK is marking the Queen's 70 years on the British throne with a monumental celebration, certainly one for the history books. The 96-year-old monarch appeared earlier on the balcony at Buckingham Palace with her family to kick off the 4-day Platinum Jubilee weekend. The highlight of the day's festivities was the birthday parade, known as Trooping the Colour. More than 1,500 soldiers and officers took part, as well as hundreds of musicians and 250 horses. No other monarch, by the way, in British history has reigned as long as her. One reason for her long tenure is that Queen Elizabeth was just 25 years old when she assumed the throne. CNN's Max Foster joins us live now from the Mall. So, Max, just walk us through some of the day's festivities.
Well, today was really about military commemoration. So Trooping of the Colour is rooted in centuries of tradition in the British military, where you would take your regiment's flag and take it through sort of war fields. And this is an opportunity really for regiments to parade their flag in front of the Queen, and this was the Irish Guard's turn this time round, but also it's developed over the years to commemorate the Queen's official birthday, and today, in addition to all of that, it was used to commemorate her 70 years on the throne. She wasn't able to make it from the palace up to Horse Guards Parade, where all of that was taking place. She was represented by Prince Charles, which is speaking to the transition that we're seeing unfold here, Zain. She is, frankly, in the twilight of her reign. She's having to think about how she creates this continuity into the next reign, and that's why Prince Charles is constantly being brought in to represent her, and why we saw him standing next to her on the balcony. The balcony moment was a key moment. It always is at Jubilees. It's the Queen's opportunity to present what she sees as the modern face of British monarchy. So back in 2002 at the Golden Jubilee, for example, you saw the whole extended family out there on the balcony. In 2012, it was stripped right back to the core members to reflect that time of austerity. And this time, it was all about working royals, people that put the work in to support the Queen in her role, and that doesn't include the Duke and Duchess of Sussex or Prince Andrew. So they weren't on there, and Prince Andrew, we've learnt, has got COVID. So he's not going to be at any of the commemorations over the 4 days. The Sussexes are invited to most of them, but they're playing it very low-key. We spotted them in a car, but we didn't see them in front of the cameras. They're only going to be going to official engagements. So this is a big gesture, I think, probably from the Sussexes, to be seen part of the royal family, if not the working royals. And, you know, extraordinary really to see them in that environment, Zain. I think you'll agree after that massive rift and all the repercussions. So this Jubilee, as other Jubilees, being used as a reset, I think, for the monarchy, and focusing on the positive, frankly, rather than all of the problems they've had in the family.
Yeah, and speaking of the positive, you know, she's 96 years old, Britain's longest reigning monarch, incredibly respected, popular, admired, adored. What will her legacy be, Max, do you think?
Well, her legacy, if you're going to, I mean, it's a big question. You know, she's a towering figure on the world stage. But if you look at her role, fundamental role is to leave the monarchy in a stronger state at which she came into it. And I think she's probably, if she were to go now, in a position to be able to say that that's true. She came into her position when the empire was crumbling and people didn't see a future of the monarchy. She reinvented that. As the Commonwealth, she reinvented so much of her role. She embraced the media revolution that happened under her monarchy, and she's now in a position where she's looking ahead. And I think what she ultimately does is represent continuity and stability. We look to her in times of crisis, in times of celebration, and I think that's ultimately what people will miss when she eventually isn't here. And that's why she's trying to empower Prince Charles in these moments. So he's always there at these moments, so we'll associate him with those moments as well, potentially. But of course he's not as popular, and if you speak to many of the people coming from outside the country, from around the Commonwealth, I don't know if you've seen this, but you know, a lot of people very attached to the Queen personally, but are they attached to the monarchy? A monarchy under Prince Charles? The jury's out on that. I don't think we will really know the answer until he's king.
Yeah, there's an interesting thought there. They're much more attached to the Queen than they are to the monarchy itself. Max Foster, you have to leave it there. Thank you so much. All right, the Queen was actually on safari in Kenya when she got the news that her father, King George, had passed away. She and her husband, Prince Philip, were at the Treetops Lodge in Nyeri at the time. 70 years later, Kenyans there gathered to watch the Platinum Jubilee. Larry Madowo has the story.
Half a world away from the UK, these kids in a remote part of Kenya are wearing this virtual reality headsets that are taking them right inside Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. Is a way for them to be a part of the celebration of the Platinum Jubilee, because Queen Elizabeth has a special connection to Nyeri, this part on the foothills of Mount Kenya. She became queen while she was here at the ripe old age of 25. Douglas Mwangi is the Queen's young leader. He won that award, met the Queen in 2018. Why did you want to do this event for this village where you're from?
The reason as to why we are doing this event, we want to expose these kids to the 21st century skills so that they can, we hope that this will inspire them to take a STEM-related career.
And what is it like to meet the Queen? Because that must be really special.
Yeah, yes, it was. It was very thrilling, very, very exciting, and part of it all, you know, it gave us a lot of credibility, the work that we are doing.
Right, with OSS Mathare, which is an informal settlement in Nairobi. But one of the things they're doing here, they're lighting beacons all around the world in the Commonwealth. And here they're going to be lighting a voice-activated beacon, which is part of the whole technology thing they have going here. The Queen has a special connection to Kenya as well. There are many people named Elizabeth here, including my own sister. So just one of the ways in which her reach really transcends the entire world. Larry Madowo, CNN, Nyeri.
We'll have much more to discuss on the Queen's Platinum Jubilee later with the author of the book, Elizabeth the Queen, The Life of a Modern Monarch. That's in about 20 minutes from now. Right, to the US now. We've just learned a little bit more about Wednesday's deadly mass shooting at a medical building in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa's police chief says that a gunman, now identified as Michael Lewis, shot and killed 2 doctors and 2 others before apparently killing himself. An assault-style weapon that was purchased just before the shooting was found at the scene, along with a handgun. The chief says that Lewis blamed his doctor for pain from a recent surgery and went to the hospital with the intention to kill. Take a listen.
I cannot emphasize enough that we train rigorously over and over and over again for not if, but when, because we have seen the violence that has taken place throughout the United States. And we would be naive not to think that that would not happen in our jurisdiction.
And that press conference there that you just saw a clip from there is actually still happening as I speak. We'll bring you more information as and when we get it about the deadly shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. All right, as funerals continue today for some of the 21 victims of last week's elementary school massacre in Uvalde, Texas, new details from the shooting are emerging. The city's mayor says a would-be negotiator actually tried frantically to reach the gunman by phone during the attack, but he didn't answer. CNN's Nick Valencia has more from Uvalde.
Our hearts are broken. Our hearts are broken for 21 family members.
Uvalde Mayor Don McLaughlin speaking out in an interview saying he rushed to Robb Elementary School once he heard of the shooting, but heard no 911 calls from students or shots fired.
Look, when the call came out that there was a shooter at that school, I left and I went to that scene within 15 minutes. And while I was there, I did not hear the 911 calls. I can assure you, had we been aware of it, or I would have been aware of it, I would have been screaming. I did not hear them. That doesn't mean they weren't blaring on every radio there.
He says he was at the nearby Hillcrest funeral home with a negotiator who was trying to get the gunman on the phone.
At the moment he went in that classroom, they started calling from. I wasn't there at the initial, but at the moment he went in that classroom, they were trying to get numbers and calls.
McLaughlin maintains trust in the law enforcement investigation, despite his frustrations with the changing narrative.
They've had 3 press conferences, and at all 3 press conferences, something has changed. I'm not part of the investigation, but I mean, what I am part of, I think the truth will come out. And if we made mistakes, we'll own those mistakes.
The Texas Department of Public Safety says they are no longer answering questions on the matter. All questions and inquiries from now on will be fielded by the district attorney's office. The Uvalde DA, Christina Busby, says once the investigation is complete, she will, quote, review it and see if there are any criminal charges that need to be brought. This as there is mounting criticism directed at Uvalde School Police Chief Pete Arredondo. Arredondo spoke to CNN earlier Wednesday and says he is cooperating with the investigation despite previous reports saying otherwise. He refused to give any substantive response to why he decided not to apprehend the gunman sooner.
You have an opportunity
to explain
yourself to the parents.
And just so you know, we're gonna do that eventually, obviously.
When?
And whenever this is done and let the families quit grieving, then we'll do that, obviously.
Mayor McLaughlin says he has not spoken with Arredondo since the shooting, but confirmed he is cooperating with DPS.
Mr. Arredondo is not a Uvalde police officer. He works for the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District. I have no jurisdiction or over him whatsoever. I've reached out, but like I said, I haven't talked to Pete.
This as the community continues grieving and burying the 21 victims. On Wednesday, the funeral for teacher Irma Garcia and her husband took place. Garcia shielded her 4th grade students from the bullets. Garcia's husband Joe died just 2 days after the shooting after a medical emergency. This picture shows mourners around the pair's caskets. DPS trooper Juan Maldonado also honored his friend, teacher Eva Morelos, and says he was with her the moment she died at Robb Elementary School.
It was an honor to spend the last moment with Eva as she left this earth into a greater place. Eva's a fighter, and she did everything she could to protect her babies, and that's her students. So we know she did everything she could, and she protected them to her last breath.
That was Nick Valencia reporting there. Mass shootings in the U.S. have become commonplace, and the numbers are staggering, including the shooting in Tulsa. There have actually been 233 mass shootings so far this year, according to the Gun Violence Archive, and it's only June, by the way. That's more mass shooting than days since the 1st of January. CNN has also counted at least 30 school shootings this year alone. More than 200,000 Ukrainian children have been removed from their country and taken into Russia by force. That's according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who accuses Moscow of ripping families apart and stealing civilians to make them forget about their homeland. And in the east, Ukrainian officials say that Russia is attacking a chemical factory where many civilians are hiding in underground bomb shelters. One official told CNN that around 800 people are there, including several children. The facility is located in Severodonetsk, a key city in the larger Donbass region that Russia is trying to capture. President Zelensky says the area is almost entirely destroyed, and officials are reporting constant rocket fire across the east. But Ukrainian's First Lady is pledging to regain full control of the Donbass. She says her country will not concede territory because that, she says, would be akin to conceding freedom. And Ukraine has managed to recapture some of its territory, including the village of Kachali, which lies northwest of Kyiv. CNN's Matthew Chance visited that area and shows us the devastation that was left behind. And we want to warn you, though, that some of these images you're about to see are disturbing.
In the liberated villages north of the Ukrainian capital, the streets are lined with the scars of war. And it's not just buildings destroyed. We met Sergei, a villager whose home was overrun by Russian troops, who then shot him, he says, and left him for dead.
So it went there and then it went out the back.
He shows me the gut-wrenching bullet wounds, but his emotional scars run even deeper. Sometimes I have nightmares and can't sleep at night, and I pray they won't ever come back, he tells me, through tears of pain and anger. I'll never forgive Russians for what they did, he says. And they did much worse. Just steps from Sergei's door, police forensic teams are unearthing yet another crime scene. Weeks after Russian troops were pushed from this area, locals are still finding the bodies of their neighbours. We were shown 3 makeshift graves on this street alone.
What do you think when you see this? What goes through your mind when you see these bodies being dug from these shallow graves at the side of the road?
So we see that Russian troops have already gone for more than 1 month, but we still find the evidence of their presence.
That's astonishing, isn't it? That even a month after they've gone, more than a month,
so
still finding bodies.
As it has
Ukrainian officials tell me more than 320 civilians are still missing in this region alone. But one by one, they're being found.
As a lot of people are missing, you cannot imagine the eyes of mothers whose children were lost. You cannot imagine eyes of relatives whose beloved have been captured or have been killed on the front line.
It is a awful, grim business, digging up the bodies of the thousands of people scattered across this entire country in shallow graves that have yet to be identified. This was Vitaly, just 43 years old, and the neighbours tell me he didn't present a threat to the Russians. He wasn't a soldier. In fact, he was vulnerable. He didn't have a job. He drank too much. His family had left him. But he was hungry, and he was trying to get some food from a Russian vehicle that was parked just here when they caught him and shot him dead. Just one of the many alleged crimes, many tragedies, in a Ukrainian nightmare that's yet to end. Matthew Chance, CNN in Kachali, Ukraine.
All right, still to come here on One World. It's the verdict reverberating throughout Hollywood and beyond. Johnny Depp scores a legal victory in a high-profile celebrity trial. But Amber Heard's lawyer says it's not over yet. Amber Heard is calling the verdict in her high-profile 6-week civil trial with her ex-husband, Johnny Depp, a setback for women. Both were found liable for defamation in dueling lawsuits. It's a big legal victory, though, for Johnny Depp, who won significantly more in compensatory damages. Right after the verdict was read, Heard said the disappointment she feels is beyond words. The actress plans to appeal, and in an interview with NBC earlier, her lawyer actually said that she has excellent grounds for it. CNN's Jean Cazares joins us live now from New York. So let's just talk about the careers now. I mean, moving forward for both of these two. Johnny Depp wins in one way, but he loses in 10 other ways. What happens to his future in Hollywood from this point onwards, Jean?
Well, first of all, this was a huge legal victory. I mean, this is huge because she accused him in that op-ed of sexual assault, domestic violence, violent attacks she testified to, and the jury believed that the evidence in that courtroom did not find her story credible. So then and there's legally a pretty clean slate for Johnny Depp. Now, we heard from the testimony that they were considering him for Pirates of the Caribbean 6, possibly not, but that 3 days after the op-ed, they got the written notice, we are not using you for Pirates of the Caribbean 6. It still has not been made, however. And one of the heads of Disney recently gave an interview and said, you know, we're thinking of maybe putting a woman in that, but we are also looking at what's happening right now. So I think anything is possible here. You know, there are reports that there were 8.8 billion people on TikTok that were voicing their support from this trial for Johnny Depp. And that obviously is something that is going to be looked at. Amber Heard testified that her part in Aquaman 2 was cut way down. However, the president of Warner Brothers DC Films, Walter Hamada, said that the reason was there wasn't chemistry between she and Jason Momoa in Aquaman 2, and so that's why they cut it down. Now, she has a contract with L'Oreal. They actually extended the contract recently, she testified, but they haven't used her. So now the trial is over, so things could pick up. On the other hand, however, she was found for defamation against Johnny Depp with actual malice, which is reckless disregard and willful intent to print something that is not true. That's not a good name to be attached to you.
There is one winner, Jean, I think, in all of this, and that is Johnny Depp's star lawyer, Camille. Just walk us through what was it about her that made everybody seem to really rally around her?
I think it was her cross-examination skills, because Amber Heard was defiant. She would testify in rapid fire. And I say those words because the clinical psychologist for the couple actually said she would talk in her sessions in rapid fire. And I think that's what we saw on the stand. But Camille Vasquez was one step ahead. Her listening skills were so attuned to everything she said, and she was able to impeach her constantly on that cross-examination. And I heard someone say, he won this because of Camille Vasquez. She played a big role in that plaintiff's case.
And just in terms of Amber Heard appealing, obviously her lawyers say that she has excellent grounds to appeal this. Does she?
You know, they're going to have to look at the case. I will tell you it's going to take money to appeal. Lots of money, right? They got the jury in one day. So how can you really vet a jury in one day when you're dealing with such a high-profile plaintiff and defendant? So there potentially is an issue. We don't know. Is there evidence they didn't get in that they wanted to get in? The judge was firm, but appeared to be extremely fair, and she's a senior judge there in Fairfax County, Virginia. So they'll really have to look at it and see if they have grounds for appeal. But it's not unusual to say at this moment, minutes after the verdict, we're going to appeal.
Right. The lawyer obviously has to do her job. Jean Cazares live for us there. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Zane.
It's a celebration 70 years in the making. We're going back live to London for the Platinum Jubilee, and I'll talk to the author who literally wrote the book on Queen Elizabeth. That's next. Hello and welcome back to One World. Let's catch up on the headlines quickly. As Russia's war on Ukraine rages on, we're getting reports that African Union chief and Senegalese President Macky Sall will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Sochi on Friday. The two are going to be discussing freeing stocks of cereals and fertilizers as well. The war is impacting exports, exacerbating the global food crisis, as we reported many times on this show. US President Joe Biden has been meeting with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at the White House today. Officials said they would discuss the strength of the alliance and make preparations for an upcoming summit. It comes as NATO is considering its next steps in the war in Ukraine, as well as the membership applications of both Finland and Sweden. OPEC Plus has agreed to boost its oil output by 648,000 barrels per day in both July and August. The cartel had previously promised to increase its production at a slower pace, but earlier on Thursday, it agreed to speed things up. A supply crunch has caused prices to skyrocket around the world in part because of Western sanctions on Russia. A Nigerian daredevil nicknamed Lionheart has arrived back in his home country after completing an epic journey. He travelled from London to Lagos on a motorbike, visiting nearly a dozen countries and encountering some harrowing circumstances along the way. But actually, it was for a good cause. CNN's Stephanie Busari joins us live now from Lagos, Nigeria. Stephanie, you and I have travelled many, many times from London to Lagos. But not quite like this, I have to say.
Certainly not, Zain. This was an incredible journey, and for Kule, a real labor of love, it must be said, just given some of the experiences that he encountered. And we were there when he arrived from this epic road trip, and we spoke to him about his experiences. Take a listen to what he had to say. A hero's welcome for Nigerian executive Kule Adeyanju, who has just completed a grueling 41-day journey from London to Lagos on his motorbike. Kule's 13,000-kilometer dizzying ride through 11 countries was to raise money to support the eradication of polio and led to a few hair-raising moments, especially in the Sahara Desert, which took him 7 days to cross.
The experience of riding the Tinzi-Tichka mountain pass, that's riding the path that takes you to the summit of the Atlas mountain. It's regarded as the most dangerous road in Africa. Wow. So it's packed with adrenaline. But you know, after going through all that pressure, when you get to the peak of Atlas mountain, you see the reward of the view is more than all the pressure you've gone through.
Things also got a little spooky out in the desert.
People say you hear spirit in the Sahara.
Oh, really? Did you hear any spirits?
Well, I heard voices, but I didn't hear spirit. So somebody speaking from like 200 kilometers away, the wind brings the voice sound waves clearly to you.
Kule chose to raise money for polio in conjunction with the Rotary Club of Ikoyi, Nigeria, because of the suffering he saw a childhood friend go through.
When we go out playing football, going swimming, he couldn't do that. Right. And I feel the pain, and I said to myself, if I can do something to make sure that another children doesn't go through this, then I'm sure gonna do it.
The WHO declared Nigeria free of wild polio virus in 2020, but there are still some vaccine-derived cases in the country. Kule says he has visited 75 countries around the world, but made an unexpected discovery about Africa during his adventure.
Going through this, the moment I step my foot on the African continent, down to where I am now, I can tell you everything I read about the African people or the African country is false. Africa is beautiful. It is a land of diversity. It's a land of hospitality. People are hospitable. People are friendly. People are nice.
Over the years, the self-confessed daredevil has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro twice and completed a 3-day bike ride from Lagos to Ghana. He has now launched a campaign called Think Africa to encourage others to embrace adventure on the continent.
This trip actually it was a big eye-opener for me to say that we've not been saying the right things about ourselves, and that is why I took it upon me to say, think Africa. My next vacation, things I want to do is think Africa. There's so much to discover on this continent.
Zane, he's really got me planning my next adventure in Africa. And he really makes a valid point. Most Africans tend to vacation in the UAE or the UK or US. So I'm definitely going to take a leaf out of his book and think about,
where are you going to go, Stephanie?
Well, I mean, I'm not quite going to do a bike ride like him, but lots of beautiful parts. Senegal is somewhere I've not visited.
I know, I love Senegal. I loved, one of my best friends lives there, and I love Dakar. But yeah, I loved it when he said that a lot of what he's read about Africa is actually false. So he was debunking stereotypes as well as part of this. Okay, Stephanie, thank you so much. Have to leave it there. All right, the last 2 years have been anything but easy for Queen Elizabeth II. She, of course, lost her husband, Prince Philip, last year at the age of 99. And she's had a recent health setbacks, a series of recent health setbacks, causing her to curtail her formerly busy schedule. Her grandson, Prince Harry, and his wife Meghan gave up their royal duties in a very public way recently as well, and her son Prince Andrew was sidelined after settling a sex abuse lawsuit brought by Virginia Giuffre. Despite those challenges, there's certainly reason to celebrate this weekend for the Queen after a momentous 70 years on the throne. The Queen celebrates her Platinum Jubilee, the longest-serving monarch in British history. Festivities began earlier on Thursday with the Queen's birthday parade called Trooping the Colour. Then the Queen and members of the royal family greeted the crowd from the balcony at Buckingham Palace. That was followed by the traditional flyover by the Royal Air Force. Time now for the exchange and a conversation with Sally Bedell-Smith. She's the author of Elizabeth the Queen, which looks at the life of a very modern monarch. She joins us live now from London. Sally, thank you so much for being with us. So the highlight, of course, during these celebrations, I'm sure for a lot of viewers, for a lot of spectators, would be really seeing the Queen herself, especially given some of the health setbacks we've seen from her in recent months.
Yes, and I think she did something very ingenious. She decided that she would take the salute from the Irish Guards after the Trooping the Colour had finished, and she deputized Prince Charles to do the trooping in her stead, and she also added Prince William and Princess Anne, and to me that was a real sort of signal of continuity. It is such a traditional celebration, and it's obviously a massive military exercise that is beautiful and inspiring, and it's something that she has always led, with a few exceptions sort of beyond her control. But it's very meaningful to her, and it represented to me a kind of common sense combined with ingenuity, that she figured out how to be a participant without pushing herself too far, but staying at the balcony with her cousin, the Duke of Kent, and together they took the salute. And then afterwards, she was surrounded by the members of her working royal family. That did not include Meghan and Harry, because they are no longer working members of her family. But the family is really crucial for her, and the continuity is really crucial.
Right. I mean, and Sally, let's just take a sort of a step back and really appreciate what we're witnessing here. I mean, this is quite a moment in history. No other monarch has served as long, 70 years, the longest reigning monarch in British history. I mean, this is a moment for the history books. This moment is packed with so much meaning.
It is. And, I mean, there never has been, and in all likelihood, unless they figure out how to extend people's lives, there won't be another. There may be another silver jubilee marking 25 years. I don't know if Prince Charles, he would have to be fairly old to celebrate that. There might be one for Prince William. So you do get a feeling that not only is this the last of this sort of celebration for the Queen, but it is the last of this sort of celebration for quite a long time. And but it is a moment, I could feel it out in the crowd today. I mean, I was in the Horse Guards parade watching the trooping, and then went out and was on the Mall. And I mean, there was such a joyous feeling, and such a almost you could sense a feeling of love for her, and I think we're going to see more examples of that unfolding in the days to come. I mean, I was here 10 years ago for the Diamond Jubilee and the massive river pageant, and everybody just endured torrents of rain so they could come out and sing God Save the Queen and wave the flags. And I think people feel it's even more precious and a little bit poignant today. But she couldn't have looked happier. I mean, she looked down at the crowd and she said she'd seen crowds like that since she was 14 months old. And she said, that's incredible.
And Sally,
that she could take joy in that.
Sally, how has her country changed since she's been on the throne? I mean, obviously, she took the throne, when she was 25 years old in 1952?
Yeah, 1952.
The country has changed really, I mean, seismically, I would say.
It has changed massively. Yeah, it is much more multicultural than it was, obviously, when she took the throne. But I think her the importance that she attaches to the Commonwealth, which is really part of her legacy. It was something that her father gave to her. He founded the Commonwealth as a voluntary association promoting good government and education and civil society, and now more recently climate change. And to her, its importance is that everybody is equal, the little nations, the small nations. And I've seen her touring Commonwealth nations down in Trinidad, for example, and she just is so comfortable in those settings. She's just really revels in the variety that is in the Commonwealth. She was a great supporter of Nelson Mandela.
Sally, I just want to explain to our audience what we're seeing. We're actually seeing President Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, just at the Arc de Triomphe, just paying tribute to the Queen on this Platinum Jubilee, just like so many other world leaders around the world. Our correspondent earlier on the show, Max Foster, who covers the royal family for CNN, brought up a really important point. He believed that people sort of seem to be much more attached to the Queen than perhaps the royal family as a whole. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. She's clearly the most popular by a significant margin, and she always has been, and that's a tribute to her unrelenting service and her steadfastness, and that it's her dedication to her people is so visible.
And Sally,
Prince Charles will,
unfortunately, Sally, we have to leave it there. Sally, we have to leave it there because I am out of time, as I'm hearing from my producers. Sally, thank you so much. And thank you at home for watching One World. I'm Zain Asher. Inside Africa's up next. You're watching CNN.
please.
Lights, camera,
Action.
I'm first a storyteller, and I dabble into directing, writing, acting, and producing.
Meet the African creatives framing their own stories from their own perspectives.
Our struggles, our glory, our achievements as a nation, as a country, have definitely shaped the way I tell my stories.
Leveraging access to the tools and harnessing new techniques to play it forward.
I'm the director, yeah?
There's so many softwares and technologies that have been available to us to be able to include ourselves. Whether you're getting paid for it, whether you're not getting paid for it, we can create the content.
These are Africa's next-gen filmmakers. This is Inside Africa.
Action.
In Johannesburg, a film crew are setting up for their production. They have only 6 days to shoot a 52-minute feature movie, and they have never done this before.
But it's going to take a while to get to one bar. My day started pretty well, you know, started miking up actors, and we had an exterior scene with the taxi. That was also nice, you know, we got some sound of the outside environments of the township. We're shooting in Soweto, by the way.
Who's driving the panel?
Thabang Hlatshwayo is making his first film with colleagues from the Multi-Choice Talent Factory, an academy established in 2018 that now has campuses in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and Zambia. Its purpose is to grow future generations of African filmmakers.
It's a one-year program, so we're 9 months in and 3 films down. And it's been an amazing experience because I've actually got to do more than sound, because we've gone on placements, we've worked at different productions, and I've had the opportunity to do more things than sound.
We like to think we give them 10 years experience in 1 year, because they don't just concentrate on being a director or a producer or a writer or whatever. They experience the entire process of the filmmaking by working in professional productions.
On set is an award-winning filmmaker, Bobby Heaney. He is the head of the Talent Factory in South Africa.
Filmmaking is about time. You're constantly against the clock. You're constantly trying to make sure that the time is spent where it's important, which is on performance and how you're going to tell the story.
So what we're going to do, on the same side of the house, we're going to get Ndofaya. Hello.
This is the first of 4 films the amateur crew will make in the next few months on shoestring budgets for broadcast on the South African satellite TV channel Mzansi Magic.
So right at the beginning of the year, we get all of the interns to think up story ideas, and we bounce them around between us, and we select half a dozen or so that we think are worth developing. It comes from their lives, it comes from their experience, so you have fresh ideas coming out from these young people.
Bobby is a veteran of South African showbiz. He's been an actor, director, and producer. Now he's teaching the next generation in the midst of a digital revolution.
10, 20 years ago, if you wanted to edit a program, you had to go to this big corporation and they would work with their massive machines and everything. Now people sit with a laptop on their laps and they're able to edit their own movie. The same applies with these things, these cameras. The technology now is so much more accessible. I mean, for heaven's sake, now you can make movies on your cell phones. And why not?
Thabang Hlatshwayo grew up on the East Rand in Gauteng, outside Johannesburg, with his mother's family. It was a love of music that got him on a journey to sound engineering, and for a while he was a DJ at parties.
So my home environment was very free, and that's where the creativity comes from. And everybody knows that I'm just like the quiet one, so when I'm in my own space, they allow me to be there. If I lock myself in the garage or my room for 4 days making music, they're very understanding of that.
But to get from there to here, Thabang had to beat hundreds of other applicants for a place at the talent factory.
Hey, some speed!
He is one of only 14 in this year's South African intake, hoping for a career in production.
It would be really difficult to get into the industry because they want people with experience, and most of us don't have practical experience. So the academy is great for that, you know, you get practical experience. It's not like theory textbook stuff, we literally go on set and work.
Although Thabang is the sound guy, his idea inspired the film they are making.
Slate 84, take 1.
It's called The Father Next Door, a story about a local politician refusing to acknowledge a secret child.
Fellow comrades, Sanbonani.
I grew up without my father, so the film is about a father that abandons their child. The child comes to work next door, his house, and he tries his best to like get rid of her because she's gonna ruin like this perfect family that he's built now. So it kind of came from my life and just a bit of, you know, creativity.
Well done. What I'm discovering from these young people is there's a kind of free flow and a spirit out there that is creating a different style of movie that I think is very, very exciting.
Let's cut it there.
Early morning in Randburg, a bustling area in Johannesburg, South Africa, which is home to many local film production companies. In a coffee shop, scriptwriter Nandi Mkhize is making it up as she goes.
I think as a storyteller, your mind wanders. It wanders to places you've never been before. It wanders to places that you hope you'll be. And those are the sort of things that I put into my writing, but also the people that I've met. The neighbor next door, my aunt, my uncle, my grandmother, my mother, my father. The stories they told me growing up have flavored so much of my storytelling in so many great ways.
For Nandi, coffee helps the creative process, and she's at work here by 8 a.m. most mornings, any given week, using the shared space to power through her storylines and give voice to her characters.
I think it's really important to say that the difficulties and the raw side of South Africa as a country is not all we have to tell. There's so many stories we have to tell, so many beautiful things, such beauty in the little moments that often go unmentioned. And as a storyteller, those are the sort of things that I love to dig deep into.
Nandi is part of a special network of young filmmakers who have emerged from the Multi-Choice Talent Factory, a school which is teaching young Africans how to tell their own stories through film. An industry veteran, Bobby Heaney, is one of their mentors.
Are we happy?
Cool. Yeah. Anything else?
Have a great day. What we're finding is that there is a great need for local content, which plays completely into our hands with the multi-choice talent factories.
Bobby brings his own experience to bear on this course. He was one of the founding forces of South Africa's small but robust production industry, which he says lagged behind the rest of the world during apartheid.
What's most interesting about South Africa is how late we got television. We only started with television in 1976, and I think it was part of the government's control, if you like, of what people saw.
Today, Nandi is meeting with colleagues Kevin and Christopher. They were in the same year at the MTF. Now they are in business together.
We thought to ourselves, why not do a crazy thing and try to tell our own stories? So that's where Beyond Black started, and it's been such an amazing, crazy journey from then on. No one tells you that it's hard to run your own company, to run your own thing.
Since striking out on their own, Beyond Black has produced 7 movies for TV and 2 feature films.
As Beyond Black Productions, we really love to tell stories that resonate with the South African experience. We like to delve into stories that touch on culture and touch on the lived experience of Black people, but what we always love to do is flip it on its head.
Have you ever thought of leaving?
Their film about polygamous romance did just that. Titled Umakoti Wetu, which translated from Zulu means Our Bride, it's a deeply ironic title.
So the story is about a man and a woman, a married couple. They've been struggling to conceive, and the man goes home to KZN and decides that he's going to take on a second wife. And in the process of that, he finds that his 2 wives have fallen in love.
In addition to making films, Nandi also writes for soap operas. To quiet her busy mind, she distracts herself in the kitchen, not following a recipe exactly, but as with her scripting, making it up as she goes along.
It's unfathomable that something that I wrote one day sitting alone on a chair in the dark for weeks, months on end is now being experienced and watched by so many people that it's something I can't describe. It brings me a lot of joy.